Hello and welcome to DCA Committee. We have 3 simple rules. Firstly, if you've got a mobile, please switch it off. Secondly, toilets are either side of the main entrance. Thirdly, no fire alarm is planned, so if it goes off, which we hope it doesn't, it should be the real thing. So in that event, you go out the main entrance to the right down the ramp, and we reassemble by the piazza, by the cathedral. Could I particularly welcome, actually, Councillor Goggin? It's Paul, it's great to see you back. Welcome. It's refreshing to have your own particular brand of common sense. No doubt that will rub off on members. Also, could I say it's impressive to see such a packed chamber. I suspect I'm recalling over 20 years ago on planning, when we considered the 2 harbourside applications. That probably was the last time we had so many people here. So well done and thank you. It's impressive to see so many Bristolians having strong views. But could I say, obviously, members may have, or members of the public may have strong views for or against different applications. But we are naturally a democracy, but we're also tolerant of people. So please listen to people, even if you don't agree with them, in silence and respectfully, please. Obviously, we've got a reasonably short agenda, but it has meaty items, so I suspect we will be somewhat longer than usual, of course. For members and officers, I propose I'll suss out how you feel, but I'll probably have a comfort break between item 2 and 3, but we'll see if you want one before, of course. Apologies. Jeremy?
Yes, Chair. One apology. Councillor Andrew Varney and Councillor Andrew Brown is substituting for him.
Councillor Brown, can I welcome you? I hope you enjoyed the meeting. I know you normally serve on DCB, so it's good to see you here. Are there any declarations of interest?
Chair, I should probably mention that in my previous life as an officer, I was responsible for negotiating the trigger points for residence parking with Ashton Gate Limited.
Though I don't stay from that, there's a prejudicial interest.
It's for people's, the committee's information that I have a lot of insight into the debate.
Minutes of their last meeting have been circulated. Can I propose they're taken as read? Is there a seconder? Philippa, thank you. The action sheet, there's only one item, item 5, which was the Growth and Scrutiny Commission looking at planning enforcement. I'm very proud that actually 5 members of this committee either submitted statements or actually participated in the debate. So I know it went well. I think it was quite a robust exchange of views. Councillor Varney, who is the vice chairman of that commission, I've asked him to actually give a verbal update on that session at the next meeting. So hopefully, I know Councillor Plowden queried whether we'd have an update. Hopefully that will satisfy you. So item 6, appeals. Gary?
Thank you, Chair. A very brief update for the committee today, and that is in relation to item 8 on the appeals report, which is on page 19, and this relates to 493 to 499 Bath Road, Brislington. It's under the informal hearing section, and you'll see there that the hearing took place on the 31st of August. There was also a subsequent day a couple of weeks later. This relates to a decision made by this committee, but some time ago, I think pre-election, and the reason for refusal were kind of design, but kind of impact on future residents, and also heat hierarchy issues as well. So in particular, the heat hierarchy, there's a real kind of key decision to be made there by the planning inspector. We're advised that he's likely to make his decision by the end of this month, and we await that eagerly, as do the applicants, I'm sure, Chair. Apart from that, Chair, unless any members had any questions, that's the update on appeals this time around.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Doesn't look so. Item 7, enforcement. I'm pleased, and I'm sure members will be pleased, to see a full page on enforcement notices. Gary?
Yes, Chair. In good timing with reference to the Growth and Regen Scrutiny Commission meeting last week. It's good to see a full page. To be perfectly honest, though, 4 of them are reserved notices, so they're the Wyvale Garden Centre ones, but there are the additional 2 as well. And I'm optimistic that more notices will be seen on these papers going forward, particularly with regards to the subject of houses in multiple occupation.
Thank you. Are there any questions? No. So we'll move to item 8, public forum. The convention is on this committee to have individual submissions before each application, so that's how we deal. In a moment, I'll pass over to Jeremy Livett just to detail how you should approach statements. Could I just say, really just building upon what I previously said, it is, with so many people here, which is great, it is going to be challenging. We've only got 30 minutes for all 4 applications. So frankly, we received them over, and they've been circulated to members over 24 hours ago. All statements have been read, digested. So can I say, and everyone called only has 1 minute to summarise their report, their statement. Please don't actually read it. Summarise it if you can. We have read it already, and every second, if you went over, you deny someone else a chance to have their say. So please don't do that. Jeremy.
Yes, so can I ask each person when they come forward to make their statement to come to the fixed mic and speak into it? It will start automatically. We'll be using a traffic light system which will be fixed for 1 minute. It starts off with green, then goes to amber and to red. By the time we reach the 1 minute, it will then go into red, and I will at that point say that you've had your minute and ask you to stop. And that will be the end of your statement. So just to clarify, that's how the process is going to work for each statement. Thanks very much.
So I'll call the names of people here who wish to speak to their statements. If you can make your way to actually the central mic, it's already on, so you don't need to play with it. And hopefully everyone's down there. If anyone's in the public gallery who's expecting to speak to a statement, please come down. So we'll move to Ashton Gate Stadium, the first item. So I have 7 people to call. Firstly, Alan Morris. Alan?
Thank you. My statement is on behalf of Bristol Walking Alliance. It's in respect to both applications, both the Ashton Gate one and the Longmore one. The point we make is a simple one. There are 2 applications which are linked because one funds the other. And one is on a design line from the Park and Ride site to the Ashton Gate Sporting Quarter. We think these 2 planning applications should, between them, be considering the obvious opportunity for building a pedestrian route with capacity for event days, and we'd ask the committee to consider whether the proposed recommendation adequately addresses this.
Councillor Bradshaw.
Thank you, Chair and members. I welcome the investment and vote of confidence in South Bristol and the Bedminster area. This scheme will create jobs and give a boost to local firms. But I do want to raise the issue of parking and traffic. There's a cumulative impact that this scheme will cause on top of previous growth at Ashton Gate. Local residents are now tired of congested traffic, obstructive parking, buses late, and all the other issues that we face on match days and around events. So my support is conditional on some tangible action to address the parking and traffic issues. No more triggers, please, no more legal tests. It needs resource to consult, to set out a technical scheme and to implement it. So thank you, Chair.
We next have had Martin Griffiths, but Lisa Nutt's going to speak on his behalf.
Thank you for having us. It's been 4 years of consultation, listening and planning. We set out with a vision to create a new city quarter built on sport, to create a catalyst for expansion and regeneration in southwest Bristol, to be community-driven, place-driven and sustainable. The application before you is the culmination of this work, and it's about seizing an opportunity to change the status of sport in the regeneration of Bristol and how it can truly transform people's lives. You've all witnessed the positive impact of the redevelopment of Ashton Gate on local jobs, local supply chain, attracting international events, world-class facilities, and of course, and importantly, enabling our charities to grow their incredible work in the community. We have to do more, and we have to bring forward new revenue streams to underpin the operations of the stadiums, the clubs, and the charities. We must future-proof ourselves for life after the Lansdowns. We feel passionately about the enormous benefit these two schemes can bring to the city, and we remain open to extra affordable housing.
That's the end of your minute. Thanks.
Thank you. Could I welcome actually Councillor Hussain? Good to see you. Understanding orders, you've entered after public forum commenced on this item, so unfortunately you won't be able to speak and vote on this, but you will be able to vote and speak on the other items. Mr. Cockett.
The proposals will transform the area, creating a vibrant new city quarter. A much-needed home for Bristol Flies is proposed and a hotel key to the viability of Ashton Gate. The SCC will enable Bristol to compete with other cities, retaining spend and investment. Following consultation, the scale and mass has been reduced. A biodiversity net gain will be achieved and the brook enhanced as a focal green spine. The proposals will improve traffic flow and bus facilities. A multi-storey car park will enable greater public realm, and improved permeability and cycle parking will maximise the opportunity for active travel. The uses will not harm existing centres. The sequential test has been passed. The future viability review will assess the potential for affordable housing, and a district heat connection is proposed with a low carbon fallback if required. This is a significant regeneration opportunity for South Bristol, placing sport, health and well-being at its heart. And we urge members to support the clear officer recommendation.
Thank you. Mr. Kapoulas.
Good evening. I'm the Flyers head coach and assistant coach for the Great Britain national team. This development represents a huge opportunity for the club and the city. It's a game changer. Our vision is to grow the sport and the positive impact it has on the community. Since joining the British Basketball League 8 years ago, Flyers have consistently grown in success and support. We've had, since October 2018, 55 straight sellouts. By having our own home at BS3, we'll have the third largest venue in the BBL, enabling us to compete at the highest level, achieve financial sustainability, invest in our women's program, grow up our academy and player pathway. It is once-in-a-generation opportunity to bring basketball to BS3 alongside football and rugby. Will attract not just sport, but business and entertainment to the city. I sincerely hope you will help us achieve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Breeze.
We know through 17 years of direct sport development experience, the single biggest contributing factor restricting our growth and therefore the public benefit we can provide is access to facilities. The Sporting Quarter provides a significant opportunity to build on the health and wellbeing initiatives we already deliver in partnership with Bristol City Council. We know that 34% of all 10 and 11-year-olds in the city already carry excess weight. We know that increased physical activity leads to improved physical and mental health, and that a long-term preventative and partnership approach to public health is critically needed. Bristol Sport Foundation is a multi-sport charity that teaches over 8,500 young people per week the skills to first attain and then maintain healthy levels of physical activity to improve their physical and mental health. This development will enable us to unlock new sport and facility development funding to support the most disadvantaged communities in Bristol. Thank you very much.
Thanks. And Councillor Fitzjohn.
Good evening. I'm objecting to the lack of sustainable transport facilities in this application. There is more work to be done. Creating better travel links, for example, between the Long Ashton Park and Ride and North Street. I'm also shocked that you have a multi-storey car park. In my view, those went out in the 70s. And 536 cars is 536 cars too many. Surely, we can use other methods to bring your staff and your visitors. The more you build in facilities for parking, the more it will be used. I would like to mention the design quality. I consider it to be overdense and too high. I know Historic England has...
That's the end of your minute.
Sorry.
Yeah. It's the end of your minute to speak.
I say, I would like DCA to...
If you can pause it, because it's unfair on everyone else. I've asked everyone just to speak for a moment, but we have read everyone's statement. Right. May I thank members of the public for their views. Can we now move to the officer's report? Richard?
Thank you, Chair.
Should I say, I'm relenting slightly. Normally, members will be aware I restrict officers to 5-minute summary, but I'm allowing Richard a little bit more.
Thank you, Chair. Can all members hear me okay? Brilliant. Well, this is the first 2 applications that I'll be presenting this evening. Both are separate and require separate decisions, but the 2 proposals are related and interdependent on each other, as both will require a resolution by members to grant planning permission in order for the other to be brought forward. The first application, known as the Ashton Gate Sporting Quarter, will provide a variety of wide-ranging community benefits that will in part justify the very special circumstances needed for the second development, known as the Longmoor Village site, to be considered acceptable, as it proposes up to 510 houses on Greenbelt land. The first application before us, again the Ashton Gate Sporting Quarter, will only be viable if it is part financed by the proceeds of sale from the Longmoor site with outline plan permission when it is sold to a residential developer. So first up, we have application 21/03165F, which is made in full. and it proposes the demolition of existing buildings, the phased redevelopment of the site to comprise a sports and convention centre, a hotel, 125 residential units, office accommodation, retail, gym, club museum, multi-storey car park, public realm improvements and landscaping, new internal access routes, new and improved vehicular and pedestrian access and infrastructure and other associated works and improvements on land west of Ashton Gate Stadium. So the 3.6 hectare proposal site is outlined in red, as you can see. It's situated to the immediate west of Ashton Gate Stadium. As existing, the site comprises a range of office, employment and bulky retail uses with associated service yard and storage areas, which are here. You'll see that Charnwood House on the western site boundary is excluded from the proposal. So running to the west of the site is Winterstoke Road. To the north is Ashton Road and then Marsh Road, beyond which is Greville Smythe Park. There's residential development running along Ashton Road here and also here next to the park. Further to the west is the Portishead train line, beyond which is the Carla Trading Estate and the Mannheim Car Auction Yard. To the north here is the A370, beyond which lies Ashton Court. Surrounding the existing stadium site, as you know, is a lot of residential development. To the immediate south is a small retail park where I think there's a Halfords and a Kentucky Fried Chicken. This is the Wicks building here. This is proposed to be removed from the, to be demolished, as we'll talk about in a second. So here is an aerial view of the site for a bit more clarity. I've run through the surrounding development, but you can see here's Ashton Road, Marsh Road, Winterstoke Road, retail park to the south and trading estate to the west. Here's a photo taken from Ashton Vale Road across Winterstoke Road, looking east towards the site. You can see in the background that's the existing stadium, and this is Charnwood House, which is not being demolished. This is a view north, further south to Winterstoke Road. You can see the Wicks Retail Centre here. Here's the existing stadium, and here's the KFC. This is taken from Ashton Road, looking south along the Collaters Brook, and you can see the existing stadium to the left. This is taken from Winterstoke Road and shows the entrance on Wedlock Way, and then further into the site, looking north towards Ashton Road along the Collaters Brook. So this is the demolition plan, and you can see the buildings that will be demolished. To the north is Cumberland House. Below this is the Nationwide Platforms building. To the west is Midas House, and to the southwest is Wicks. So this is the proposed site plan. You'll see that the development is split into 6 distinct development plots. Plot 1 here, this is the multi-storey car park with access from Wedlock Way. It's 8 stories high, will comprise 536 parking spaces, with 27 being wheelchair accessible. It will also provide 144 cycle parking spaces. This parking is proposed to be used by the hotel, the proposed office, the gym and visitors to the SCC and existing stadium. The ground floor and the first floor will comprise a club shop for the various Bristol sports clubs, a club museum and a gym. To the immediate north of the multi-storey car park, this is the proposed fan zone where fans will congregate before events. To the north of this is plot 2. This is proposed to be a 4-star hotel with 232 guest rooms. It will be 10 stories high. Yeah, sorry, can you not see my cursor? Right, sorry. There it is. Thank you. It's on that screen instead of that screen, that's the problem. Right, sorry, starting again. So the ground floor of the hotel will provide access to the SCC, and the first floor will provide a bridge access leading to the existing stadium. The west entrance to the hotel here will form a new public square with hotel drop-off point in front of it. So plot 3, this is the SCC. It's a sports and convention centre and a new home for the Bristol Flyers basketball team. It will be 4 stories high with a capacity of 5,202 standing spectators and 3,626 seated. It's designed to be a flexible space which can hold conferences, exhibitions and other entertainment and cultural events. On the roof there will be a large recreation space comprising 5-a-side football pitches, an outdoor gym and a juice bar. To the immediate west here, this is plot 4. This is a residential block comprising 54 units, being 28 one-bed and 26 two-bed units. It's 14 stories high. To the immediate north here, there are 31 car parking spaces, 4 being accessible, and a further 111 cycle spaces being provided. All the flats meet minimum space standards. The vast majority are dual aspect and all have private amenity space, and there's an additional 195 square metres of outdoor roof terraces, including play spaces. To the north of the parking, this is plot 5. This is a 10-storey office block. It's got 2 dedicated accessible spaces with additional parking and cycle storage within the multi-storey car park at plot 1. It provides 2,610 square metres of office space, with approximately 350 square metres being taken up by Bristol Sport, Ashton Gate Limited, and the 4 other community foundations associated with the club. So moving to plot 6, this is at the north of the site. This comprises 2 residential blocks with a total of 71 units, 35 one-bed and 36 two-bed. The north block, which is just here, that's 6 stories, and the south block is 8 stories. They're awarded 33 parking spaces here, 4 being accessible and 116 cycle parking spaces. Each unit has private amenity space, and there's an additional outdoor courtyard of about 300 metres squared, and this also includes 92 square metres of play space. So there's 3 access points to the site, vehicle access points. The first one's here, and this is for the plot 6 units. It leads into the parking to the rear here. Slightly further south, this is the other entrance on Marsh Road. Now this is a one-way system running from north to south, like this. It provides access to the services for the SCC, also provides service access for plot 5, and it also provides residential access for plot 4 down here. Beyond the SCC, this is the Marina Dolman Way. You'll see that the Colletters Brook is being opened up, providing additional blue and green infrastructure, providing a connection between Greville Smythe Park here down to the fan zone down here. To the north here, this is the Gravel Place, which is a flexible open square, including seating, artwork, garden and food outlets. There's also the Southern Park car park here, which provides 117 parking spaces with 16 being accessible. There's a new shared pedestrian and cycle pathway running from Ashton Road down through the site and then down along the western boundary along Winterstoke Road. Sorry, excuse me. So the next slide is some site sections. This is the multi-storey car park here. This is the hotel. This is plot 4. This is plot 5, and this is plot 6. And there's the existing stadium in the background with the proposed SCC there. So this is the view from Winterstoke Road. This is just taken further into the site, so you can see there's an indication of how the seating plan would work within the stadium, the kind of overall height, and then we've got the rooftop sports facilities there. This is the view from Ashton Road looking through the site. So here's the existing stadium. This is the new opening up of Colletters Brook. There's the link between the hotel and the stadium. Here's the SCC, and this is plot 5. Similar section drawing again. This is the car park, hotel, residential block, office block, and other residential block at plot 6. And again, there's some indicative kind of elevations of what the SCC will look like. So now we've got some CGI images which show additional detailing. So again, this is the car park, this is the fan zone, the hotel, plot 4 residential, plot 5 office, plot 6 north block, south block, SCC, the sports facilities along the top. This is looking kind of southwest from the proposed Gravel Place, which leads in from Ashton Road. So again, this is plot 6 residential, and this is the SCC, and this is the improved green-blue infrastructure running through the park, running through the site north to south. This is a view of the fan zone. This is the proposed hotel. This is the multi-storey car park, and this is the existing stadium. This is looking south again from Gravel Place. just showing the relationship between the proposed SCC and the existing stadium and the Marina Dolman Way here. This is a view east from Winstoke Road. Again, here's the car park, hotel, residential block, office block, and the SCC in the background. So, in terms of consultation and public comments, the application was advertised by neighbour notification letter, site notice and press advert, and then following an amendment to the environmental statement, the application was re-advertised via press adverts on the 15th of June and the 21st of September. 53 letters of support have been received, 16 objections and 4 neutral to the development. I've gone through the various key issues and objections in my report, but the primary concerns seem to relate to the impact on local parking and additional traffic congestion, the lack of affordable housing proposed, the height of plot 4 being the residential block and the overall scale of the development, which is considered to be towards the upper limit. And also there's some negative aspects to the design. In terms of the first point there relating to local parking, well, there's been extensive and prolonged discussions between the applicant and officers in relation to highways issues. Pip Halson, who is our Transport Development Manager, is here this evening to address any queries members will have on this issue, because it's obviously quite a complex situation with a long history regarding the existing stadium. Similarly, in relation to the lack of affordable housing, Jim Cliff, the Planning Obligations Manager, is also here this evening to discuss this issue. But members are to be aware that the submitted viability assessment, which justifies the lack of affordable housing units, has been independently verified by external consultants and is agreed by officers. Moving to the second to last bullet point, the height of plot 4 has been reduced from 18 to 14 stories. Officers acknowledge that the scale and quantum of development of the site is quite large, but it is required to make the scheme viable. Long and short range visual impacts of the scheme, as demonstrated in the submission documents, are considered to be acceptable and not to have any significantly adverse impact on the nearby heritage assets. Overall, the scheme is considered to provide good living conditions for the vast majority of homes across the site, but officers do accept that some adverse aspects are to a degree unavoidable. The development sites like this without some urban design and living compromises needing to be made. So the officer recommendation is for the application to be approved. The SCC element will provide many citywide benefits, which various members of the public have already run through this evening. It will provide a new home for the Bristol Flyers. It will also host numerous events, conferences and exhibitions and provide additional sports facilities. The proposal will provide 125 residential units on a sustainable site at a time when the council cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing, so this is awarded significant weight in the planning balance. The application will also provide a considerable amount of commercial space and a substantial amount of additional employment opportunities. The scheme will deliver vast improvements to blue and green infrastructure, additional public realm, and additional shared pedestrian cycle paths through the site. The application demonstrates a biodiversity net gain of 31%. On balance, officers recommend that the application is approved subject to conditions and planning obligations to be finalised and agreed under the delegated authority if members are minded to approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. We now move to questions, not debating points, of course. I've got 3 questions initially, all related to transport. Firstly, I think it's for you actually, Richard. The Walking Alliance queried the amount of provision for actually walking in the scheme. Could you just respond to that challenge?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Regarding the amount of walking spaces.
Okay, if I just get one of the previous slides up. So you'll see that the scheme has this blue-green spine running through the middle of it. This improves connectivity through the site by opening up the Marina Dolman Way. So it provides an access from Greville Smythe Park down to the fan zone, so that would draw pedestrian movement this way. There's also improvements to the the shared pedestrian and cycle path running through the site along this side here. It's also the multi-storey car park and other parking facilities do actually provide a net gain of parking on site and free up a lot more public realm to be enjoyed by not only residents but visitors to the site. Pip, is there anything you want to add?
We were looking, from my perspective, more about the way you walk to, not around. So if there's a question about the permeability, the site itself, we negotiated a position where I was able to remove my road safety objection, but it was very minimal change. So I can't say we're going to have the optimum, but we have come to a position that was enabled me to remove the objection, and that's really the position we got in. So that I think that the walking connection is much more connected to the Longmoor site, so I'd be happier then to talk about that and how we're going to protect that option.
And my second question was to you, Pippa, and you hinted, I think, in your reply already. I know the so-called super crossing over Winterstoke Road was quite a vexed issue, and in the report, a compromise seems to have been reached. I mean, I've read it, of course, but do you want to publicly just flesh it out?
Okay. Both my colleagues and I liked the desire line of what was called a supercrossing. Firstly, there is no such thing as a supercrossing. What it was going to probably be is a two-stage toucan. However, the location of it required significant modelling to satisfy our network management road safety issues. The cost of doing that was deemed by the applicant too expensive for their viability, and that is why I looked at a second option which would provide a safer walking space. But it was not our optimum. Our optimum would have been able to do that, but we as a council do not have the funding to be able to support that at this moment. So we're utilising the funding to prioritise where we can deliver within what's being offered from the development. Does that make logical sense?
That does indeed, and reflects what's in the papers, to be fair. My final question was, and this very much piggybacks or picks up Councillor Bachel's concerns about parking. Obviously, I know it's been a vexed issue around the stadium for some time, so can you clarify what the present status is?
Ideally, we would have liked a match day, event day parking arrangement. However, the previous application had provided for a trigger point for that to be done. Because we couldn't evidence that that didn't work, we are going to continue that with revised figures so that the cumulative events will create a new trigger point, and it is agreed that if that trigger point is hit, then the applicant will be providing the wherewithal for us to consult and install a parking.
As is in the papers,
yes.
The applicant is actually Bristol Sports is fully in support and actively engaged in this dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it would be, we would not be supported for objecting to that proposal because we don't have the sufficient evidence base to say that it wasn't effective. But we have got the travel plan contributions, and we will be utilising some of that to ensure that that is part of what it is, and any mitigation, we can utilise that to help for that.
Thank you, Pippa. Any other questions, Ed?
It may be unsurprising that I just want to pick up on that point. What the trigger point last time was based on the fact there's been a stadium here for a long time, and we needed to evidence that there have been a lot more people attending the stadium because it's larger. What we have now is a cumulative approach where we're getting not only a second sports and convention centre, we've got a hotel with, was it 500 rooms and 125 flats. Only about 60 parking spaces for those 125 flats. So I understand what Councillor Bradshaw is saying when he says, why are we still triggering this according to attendance when actually the housing and the convention centre and the hotel could all have their own impact and a cumulative impact on the local area, and therefore the trigger points are no longer the thing we should be hanging this on, because we've got a bigger and different development now.
As I previously stated, the key in planning is the evidence to challenge, and we do not have that evidence. So that is why the option proposed by the developer that we put extend and amend the previous one was deemed as a gesture that it would be worth pursuing. Ideally, it isn't what we like, but also the most recent consultation for changing parking in the area was not wholly supported. So it would need a complete reconsultation, and the best place to get a reaction to that is when it's started the activity and people can see how it's changing their lives, and therefore they may be more in favour as a whole in the area of having some form of parking controls. So although as officers we would have liked the other option, this is the position that my advice is that this would not prevent us from being deemed as unfair by an inspector.
We're talking about not being able to evidence that this will have an effect, but that still seems to be talking about the match day crowds, not the day-to-day operations of hotels and housing. Is that correct? As
you know, I only started in the council in April, so I can't really personally say, but I know my colleagues, when they reviewed everything, we did get to this point where we're challenged that in order for us to say something doesn't work, we have to be able to show that it doesn't work, and we do not have that. And so that is the position we're in. But the trigger now will be negotiated to be a bit more precise to the cumulative impact of all the different events. And therefore, and we will be asking for their evidence bases to be coming to us more regularly during that period of time when we assess. So it's not optimum, but it's fair.
And just the evidence base, are we talking about attendance, or are we talking about counting traffic and counting parking, not just when there's a match on, but also day to day? If we could do some counts on a number of days to see if people are actually either attending the hotel or people who live there are parking on the street rather than in the parking provided.
We will look at two things using the funding that we're going to get on the travel plan, is to do some parking beat surveys at the time, and that shows people origins and destinations of the people that are parked in the area. That will accumulate information about that. And the second thing is their own trip generation that comes to each event. And because they're going to be giving tickets with their parking spaces, that should be a more efficient way of being honest about the trip generation that comes with it. Ticket sales are key, and they won't have someone coming in there without a ticket sale. So I think that we're going to be developing this travel plan methodology with them as part of the travel plan process.
I just want to, one last question is that this is not really about the matches. This is about the housing and the hotel. This is the change that we're seeing. So I'm just not quite clear from your answer if we're going to be assessing on a normal day as well as match days.
We can build in all those options, so we can look at what happens on a non-match day. We can look at all of those. Every part of that is possible as we develop the travel plan and the monitoring that needs to go with it. That they're paying a contribution for us to be able to do that. So that is why I deem it as my recommendation is that it's adequate to be fair.
I understand you have dissatisfaction.
I'm leaving it.
Hence why I allowed you to ask those questions. Yeah. But realistically, we've heard the officer's response. We know things need to move and to improve. The officers know that we've had the assurance that will do, and they're working with Bristol Sports on that. John?
Well, Chair, I have one more question about viability, but I'm happy to leave it if we're staying on transport.
I think I've been pretty lenient, bearing in mind we are where we are. John?
Just a quick question. I'd like to hear a bit more about the viability of the affordable housing, if possible, please. I assume this is a site that's potentially going to generate massive revenues for the companies and the city. So just to understand what the viability study looked at for zero affordable housing.
Jim, I think that's to you.
You might well be right, Councillor. Yeah, so this is in all the years I've been coming before planning committees to talk about various sorry tales about viability, this is the first time I've ever sat before you and said that the independent check of the applicant's viability that I commissioned on behalf of the Bristol City Council actually considered that the development was less viable than the developer did. They thought that the developer, the applicant, has actually been overly optimistic in some areas. It's an odd scheme to look at because usually when you're looking at scheme viability, you're looking at broadly a housing scheme that might just have a little bit of retail attached to it on the ground floor or something. This is a very large mixed-use scheme with a whole range of components. And there's a general sort of unwritten acknowledgement that nobody builds sports stadia to make money. They simply don't make money. You know, they're delivered by people doing it in effect benevolently. Wealthy landowners or wealthy owners of clubs tend to build a stadium. When you look at what we've got here, you're absolutely right that the development generates a lot of revenue. Obviously, the sale of the affordable housing, the rental of the office block, the capitalised value of the hotel, you know, having been whatever percent full on every night, money coming in from the car park. You've also got a scenario where the starting point is that the land value is reasonably high, and the landowner is required through planning viability to have a reasonable return on the land. You've also got very high build costs. Tall buildings are expensive to build. They're much more, if you want lots of affordable housing, basically you build lots of Barratt housing estates because they're lower density, they're cheaper to build. When you start building flats and apartments, you're building stairwells and cores and all sorts of things that aren't sold. They have very little value. And as you've seen from Richard's presentation, most of the buildings here are quite tall, so they have high build costs. You've also got quite significant public realm costs because you're looking at a coherent overall kind of master plan approach to the site. You've got all the linkage costs and the public realm costs that come with that, and they're very significant as well. So though there are significant revenues coming out of the site, actually the costs going into the site are in effect more. There's still a profit for the developer. It's one of those weird things. Not viable doesn't mean no profit. It actually means that when all the All the revenues are taken account of. That's your starting point. You have all your revenues. You then deduct all your costs, which are your bill costs, your professional fees, your marketing, contingencies, all those things, and the developer's profit, because that's counted as a cost. If when you deduct all those costs from all the revenues, you get to a figure that is lower than the land value, then the scheme is, in planning terms, unviable. It's an odd thing, but planning viability isn't the same as real viability. People take risks and make decisions all the time on what they're prepared to develop for. Planning viability is predicated on advice in the government's planning practice guidance and advice given by the RICS that broadly dictates that you would expect profit margins in the region of 15 to 20% of gross development value, for example. So we have to work within certain constraints in doing planning viability. So planning viability, yes, we sometimes see schemes, and we sometimes put schemes to you that we say, in planning terms, they're not viable, yet they'll still be built because the developer is, taking a particular view or a risk or has a particular attitude to how they want to build. So you are right, yes, there are significant revenues coming out of this. And I think, if I'm right, it was a while ago that I wrote it, but I think in the particular section of Richard's report, there'll be some tables in there that show the amount of income and the amount of expenditure. I think I summarised those. So they run into the hundreds of millions in both cases. But yes, it is set out there, but there are significant costs and revenues, and the developer will make a healthy profit.
John, does that answer your question? Fine. V.
We're back to transport. I'm sorry, Philippa. I think a lot of us know the area quite well, and it can be, and I experienced it last weekend, it's like the ninth wheel of hell down there, it really is, partly due to roadworks close by, I understand. But am I to understand that the plans around traffic congestion in the area, basically what we're saying is we'll use the 106 money to work up a plan of what to do about it after the event? Because I can understand residents finding that a bit underwhelming, to be perfectly honest. We'll suck it and see how bad it is, and then we'll come up with a travel plan afterwards, because I can't find much detail on that. Or have I missed something really, really obvious? Thank you.
The only intervention that's going to happen that's related to this particular scheme is the improvement to the existing pedestrian crossing. The rest of the work that will be done is related to the Section 278 works, which will be things like resurfacing, putting bays in and things like that. They are the normal activities that do that. What we were looking at was asking for a contribution to model the corridor to see if the toucan could be delivered. But that was deemed too expensive for this, so the only intervention related to this scheme is the improvement of the pedestrian movement on the existing crossing.
Tom.
Thank you. A couple of questions relating to the housing. The first one is about sustainability. So I'm interested to know how the 125 residential units stack up in terms of our ambition to be carbon neutral by 2030. And also, given that they're, where their location is, they'll presumably be quite attractive to investors in the short-term let market, and I was interested to know if there is any sort of clause or condition in place around principal residents to make sure that, down the line these homes are for residents in Bristol and not just rented out on event days.
Richard, for you, I think.
Well, the non-residential buildings achieve a BREEAM Excellent score. The priority for the site is a district heat network connection. There is a backup option in case the network isn't there in time for when the site's actually to be occupied, and that is a significant range of PV and air source heat pumps. Now, if the heat network connection is achieved, then that negates the need for the air source heat pumps. And so the air source heat pumps that are demonstrated in the sustainability statement, they'll be removed. meaning that the renewable energy requirement of 20% is not quite achieved. Now, obviously, it can be achieved by securing additional PV on site. So that's why we've conditioned an additional energy statement so that this can be finalised when there's a clear indication as to when the heat network connection will be here. But the absolute priority, as is clearly set out in the submission documents, is that this will secure a district heat network connection. In terms of the units and who will occupy them, we've got no evidence of that at this stage. That's ultimately up to whoever owns them, whoever's built them. So ideally they'd be for local residents, but if they're on the open market, then it's open market housing that can be bought by anyone.
Gary? Yes, thank you, Judge. And just to add to what Richard said there, I completely understand the issue and the sentiment about, will the residential properties proposed as part of this development and lots of other developments around the city, will it be their principal residence? And this has been talked about around the country, isn't it, in various kind of property hotspots and that. Unfortunately, at the moment, as a city, we don't have those controls in place in terms of either policy or legislation. So, hopefully that will change in due course, but we just don't have those tools at our disposal at the moment in determining this application.
And Andrew.
Thank you. I've got a few questions, I'm afraid. I'll keep going until you tell me to stop, Chair. First, on affordability, on affordable homes, was there any consideration or discussions with the applicants about offsetting the lack of affordable homes in this development with more on the Longmoor development that we are told is linked but not linked?
I'm not sure it's appropriate to ask Jim this because it relates to a planning issue. Gary?
Thanks, Chair. I was looking towards Jim, and Jim might bail me out on this one. I mean, as members will be aware, the main thing you've got to consider is the application that's before you, and I think on its own, as Jim has explained, the scheme just isn't viable. So here there is a really clear rationale for there to be no affordable on this application, so that this application has to be determined on its own merits. When we come to the next application, which we can't predetermine now, then you'll be aware it's policy compliant, it's 30%, and that's due to the viability of that one, that particular scheme, because it's a different set of circumstances. It's a greenfield site. This is a complex brownfield site with existing use values on it as well. So I don't think it's possible in planning terms to offset the lack of affordability of this application onto another application. Looking at it on its own merits, it's a case of, well, can the scheme provide it either on site or a less preferable route, provide a commuted sum to be provided off site? And the answer to that is the scheme just isn't viable. It just can't deliver that at all. There are viability review clauses in the proposed Section 106 agreements. So if there is a better viability, then a commuted sum could arise out of that, albeit it's got a lot of hard work to do in order for that to happen, really. So my answer to that question is that in these circumstances, no, we can't kind of move one lack of viability on one application to another one.
I think, Gary, you did very well without Jim's help, so well done. Andrew, your next question.
Thanks for that, Gary. I appreciate what you're saying about them being two different applications, but we are on the next one. This is being used to justify the very special circumstances for developing on that site. That's why I was asking that question. About the height of the building, so we're looking at the residential building being 14 stories tall. Can you give me an estimation of how tall that is, or how tall this adjacent stand of the stadium is in sort of equivalent terms of stories?
Yes, I can. I think the existing stand is 37 metres, but I'll just find out exactly how tall plot 4 is for you. 1 second. So plot 4 would be 46 metres above ground level, and this includes the open roof garden and plant on the top. So it's 14 stories, but then it's got stuff on top as well. So the total height is 46 metres. So it's about 10 metres taller than the existing stadium.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. The gym that is there, is that going to be open access or is that a commercial enterprise? I know that, again, another link with the Longmoor development, because residents in Longmoor will get, I believe, get access to the gym and also to the sort of BSF app. And I was wondering if it's open access commercial enterprise, and B, whether any consideration has been given to existing residents in the vicinity of the stadium.
I believe it's a commercial gym, but there is going to be an arrangement between the future residents of Longmoor who will get priority access via some sort of community access plan that will be secured via the Section 106. Also, I believe that the Bristol Sport Foundation and other charities will, in terms of the gym facilities on the SCC, will hold events there for local school kids and whatnot, and I presume that the future residents of Longmoor will also be included in that in terms of the as yet undecided community access plan. But in terms of the gym within the multi-storey car park, I think that will be available for anyone, but it'll be a paying gym like all others are.
Okay, thank you. 2 more questions, if that's all right, Chair. One is with regards to the pedestrian crossing. So the contribution from the developer has been capped at 500,000. So is that sufficient to cover the cost of the alternative crossing that's been identified or improvements to it?
The 106 contribution for the crossing is for the design consultation and get it ready. The delivery of it will be with the Section 278. So we get it to a position where it's deliverable, and then when they're ready to deliver their Section 278 works, it will be then the interventions will come in then, subject to road safety audits, etc., which is the normal process.
Okay, so the 500,000 that's referred to in the papers, is that covering all the cost, most of the cost?
The normal process is the 278 remains negotiable until we have the exact costs of all the works that need to be gone with it. So the process is before they start on site, they must have come into the 278 agreement. Then we go through the technical processes of getting those ready, and in the bond will then be placed to cover the cost of all that work, so that the council is protected, but they are likely to deliver their own Section 278 works, and we hold the bond until we're happy that that's certifiable to return to council's responsibility.
Okay, thank you. And in fact, my last question is about there's two points in the papers where conditions are referred to, but I can't actually see them on the amendment sheet on the list of draft conditions. And I don't know if it's just because it's referred to slightly different, or whether I'm going a bit cross-eyed after going through all the papers and maybe not just taking the information in. But on page 46, there's a reference to the phasing of the schemes, and I couldn't quite see that in the being conditioned, and I couldn't see that in the thingy. And then there's a subsequent reference to privacy screens on the balconies of the tower block. I think it's on the tower block or on one of the residential developments, and I can't see that referenced either.
Okay, so what was the first condition relating to? Sorry, the second one was privacy screens, but I didn't
So page 46.
I haven't got page reference numbers, sorry, by the way.
Right,
Which key issue is it in?
The following obligations are recommended: that the applicant provide evidence of the capital receipt. Viability review will be submitted no later than 28 days after commencement of plot 4. It's in the section on viability, just underneath the viability tables.
Sorry, just to clarify, is that the viability review?
Yeah.
Yes. So that won't be a planning condition, that will be a clause within the proposed section 106 agreement.
Right, okay, thank you.
Okay, sorry, I got there in the end. The condition relating to the privacy screens, it's probably best if you look at this plan here. So this is plot 6 here, this is the north block and this is the south block. So if you see these balconies here, they're in quite close proximity to these balconies here. So the condition will require a privacy screen on the side of these balconies so that you don't have a direct view into the habitable rooms of the neighbouring block.
So my question was, I couldn't see that on the list of proposed conditions.
It's a draft list. It's still yet to be finalised.
Are there any other questions? Tom?
Yes, thank you. Just a couple more relating to the housing again. Obviously, this is going to be quite a dense development, and the area is going to be rammed full of people on event days. Can you talk a bit more about the noise mitigation measures for the housing, and just a logistical one about the access for deliveries for residents and things like that?
So in terms of the noise impact, we will be conditioning various noise mitigation measures. Mark's actually here tonight, the pollution control officer, so maybe he can say a bit more. We did have concerns to do with the impact of the servicing yard here, which serves the SCC, because originally that was going to be an open yard, so open air, and there was concerns that, you know, during various servicing things being undertaken, that there would be an impact on the residents of plot 6, but now that's been enclosed, so that's satisfied the majority of Mark's concerns in terms of the impact the SCC would have on the surrounding blocks. In terms of how the site will operate, on match days, the Marina Dolman Way will be closed off, so football crowds and rugby crowds won't be allowed access into the residential areas, and vice versa on the SCC. When there's events there, there'll be additional security gates which ticket holders will have to go through. So it's not just going to be, you know, mobs of supporters swamping residential developments. I don't know if, and also all the residential blocks, there's no residential use on the ground floors. All the residential uses are on the upper floors above a mezzanine. So there's going to be no, you know, city supporters knocking on windows and things like that. I don't know if you want to say anything, Mark, in terms of any concerns that you had to do with noise mitigation and what conditions have been advised?
I think you've covered everything there, Richard. I think they did submit a noise impact assessment which looked at both the noise from the development affecting existing housing and affecting housing as part of the development, but also existing noises, so some commercial uses and road traffic affecting the residential and hotel parts of the development as well. I was happy with that, but as Richard says, we'll be asking for conditions to confirm those at the design stage.
Thanks, Mark. So I believe that's responded to all the questions. Shall we now move to debate, please? Can I kick off? One of the benefits of having sat in this chamber for 30 years, most of which on planning, is I think I have quite a good planning memory, rather like an elephant, of course. I certainly have seen quite a few stand and stadium planning applications by the city and now Bristol Sports. I've even seen some by the gas, but we don't speak about those in South Bristol, of course. Seriously, I know this application has inched forward, and certainly the applicant and its agents probably believes it has inched. But in my view, this city and its people owes Bristol Sports a huge debt of gratitude. They've actually produced over the years not only a sub-regional sporting centre of excellence, but schemes in this for actually a national centre of excellence. And I think that should be endorsed and supported, of course. Not only that, obviously, and I speak as a South Bristol councillor, which I feel needs actually investment and regeneration. I think it's great how it's actually Bristol Sports has pushed forward business development and actually encourage conventions and conferences, etc., as well as the pop and the entertainment things at the stadium. And this, I see, as very much the culmination of their efforts. The convention centre, the new basketball court, the gym, the hotel, the parking, and the housing would actually complete their, well, in my view, their objectives and deserve support from us. I believe all the issues about design, the affordable housing will not here. The viability project, these heights, of course, have been addressed. The most difficult issues from my viewpoint were the transport. We heard from Pippa, the issue of the crossing over Winterstoke Road's been addressed by a bit of a compromise. As Councillor Bradshaw has rightly said, there remains a key issue in that area, and it's not going to be solved here this evening. I must say, both I and others in this chamber have long felt the City Council needs to play its own part. We've got the Long Ashton Park and Ride just over the way, and Bristol Sports for years made the plea to use it on match days when it's not being used, and so far the council's not responded positively. So we've heard from Pippa that yes, further work now needs to be done and will be being done about if a residence parking seems appropriate, of course. Overall, I think this is a huge positive proposal and it will command my complete support. Philippa.
Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you to everyone for coming, and thank you to all those people who've spoken. I really appreciate that, and it's brilliant for you to sit through all of this. Thank you. I'd just like to say I, like you, Councillor Eddy, really support this development. I think Bristol Sport have got a proven record. They already work with 8,500 young people every week. I think it's brilliant to have the opportunity to work with more young people every week. Fantastic that somebody mentioned working with more women's sports people, bringing more women into sport, and working with some of the most disadvantaged people in our city as well. So really supportive for those reasons. It will bring jobs into the area and develop skills, which is also really important. And the other point to make is that it's a brownfield site, and this will enhance and improve the brownfield site with its biodiversity net gain. So, thank you.
Thank you. Paul.
Thank you, Richard, and thanks for your kind comments at the start. I will try my best to live up to them. Yeah, I'm hugely in favour of this particular application that we have in front of us at the moment. I represent Hartcliffe and Witherwood Ward, as you know. I live on Nova's Hill. I can hear the stadium sometimes, depending on which way the wind's blowing on match days. And I was lucky enough, actually, a friend of mine had a spare season ticket on this Saturday just gone, and I went along to the stadium and watched the match. And the result wasn't great, but there were obviously a huge amount of people employed within the stadium, many of whom live in my ward or in that area. We don't have a huge amount of jobs in South Bristol. Given that this is not only going to create jobs in construction, obviously, when it's first built, as Philip has said, it is a completely brownfield site, and as I say, I know it very well. having lived in the local area for the last 16 years. The Bristol Sport have a really good record of employment and staff welfare. There is actually, I think, a Labour councillor who works within the stadium, and she says how good they are. We've got connections to the heat network. We've got the additional facilities which are going to create trade in not just North Street, but if you know the area, West Street, there's a lot of closed down shops. East Street is dreadful for closed down shops, so there's going to be more footfall and trade going through there, giving money to local businesses. We've got they do a huge amount of work with young kids in my ward. And it will contribute to the health of Bristol. It's got a great biodiversity net gain, public realm improvements, and even the letters. There were far more letters in support than against. So, yeah, I think it's really good.
Thanks, Paul. Andrew.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think I've got reservations, as I think probably came through in my questions, particularly around the lack of affordable homes, the height of the tower block. Although I am reassured by some of the diagrams and indeed the answer to my question with regards to how that relates to the stadium, because it's sometimes difficult to get an idea of real perspective from diagrams and impressions. So. Yeah, thanks for that. And I think, ultimately we have to take the application in the round and the opportunities that it brings in terms of both jobs, community engagement and leisure opportunities for people, I think, outweigh any of the reservations I have. I should add to that list, of course, the transport considerations that Councillor Bradshaw raised, and I think everybody here recognises that there are concerns in that area that predate this application, and this application may or may not exacerbate, and I think that's an issue that will have to come back under consideration elsewhere within the council. But all in all, at a time when leisure opportunities are being lost elsewhere in South Bristol, I think this is a huge opportunity, so I will be supporting it.
Thank you, Andrew. Ed.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the officers for all their wise advice and so on. There's a lot to like about this. It's really good to see a consultation taking place and amendments happening as a result, unlike some of the things we've heard today where the consultation, in previous meetings, where the consultation has resulted in no changes, so that's great. Biodiversity, great gain, what's not to like from a Green Party perspective. And blue-green infrastructure being put into the site and the opening up of the river is great. It's going to improve the public realm around the site. Regeneration, jobs, regeneration and in a cultural offer as well in South Bristol is all good to like. And again, unlike some of the previous applications we've seen in this committee, actually what seems to be quite decent housing for people. So on balance, I'll be supporting this, but I would like to note a few concerns. It does seem to be very, very dense and very high. And it does have the feeling of squeezing a quart into a pint pot, the overall development. I think you don't have to look very far to see what sort of traffic and parking problems are caused by the operations of the stadium. And hiding behind a lack of evidence, I think, is a problem. So I would like to make sure that the Section 106 covers studies looking at the widest possible impacts, not just match days, but the overall impact of the operations, because the multi-storey car park, people have to pay to park there. And so they will seek, if they can, to park on the street elsewhere for free. So that is a bit of a problem. For your information, Chair, Long Ashton Park and Ride, there was an experiment of using that for match day parking in 2003. The police, after one single match, asked for it to be stopped, I happen to know this, on safety grounds, because so many people walking along the entirely unsuitable A370 that it was considered entirely unsafe. And that's why I think the Walking Alliance is right to say we need a better, more direct walking route on the Desire Line. And I think my biggest problem with this is for a club willing to lose millions every year, including £38 million in the last financial year, and claiming to support and be community-led. to use the fact that they're building a sports and convention centre and a multi-storey car park, presumably unprofitable things, to offset what's presumably profitable gain on the housing, I think may be legally defensible, but I think it's morally indefensible, and I would like to see very much the stadiums making good their commitment to look again at affordable housing, because I really think this is a problem for me. But given that it's legally defensible, I will be supporting this.
Fee.
Hi-ho. Yes, travel-wise, I am disappointed in there's one line here. Travel plans for the SCC, hotel, offices and residential blocks are to be secured by Section 106 obligations. If I lived around there, I wouldn't be terribly reassured, if I'm honest. But all in all, there's a lot going for this application. And it's worth noting historic England as well. Visually, don't object to the look of it, unless it's clad in brightly done cladding. So let's hope it's not robin red. Yes, so I'm not going to throw rocks in the path of this one. I'm happy to vote for it.
Tom.
Yeah, thanks. I realise we've gone on a bit on this one, so I won't repeat what everybody has already said, just to reiterate the comments that this does represent a significant investment in this part of the city, which is fantastic. It's a little bit disappointing that that investment couldn't stretch to providing some units of affordable housing, but on balance, this is fantastic and I'll be supporting it.
And John.
Yeah, I think I'll just say that I don't think the history of Bristol Sport and what a good company it is really a planning consideration for me as a proud Bristol Rovers fan. But for all of the other benefits that this gives the area, I'll be voting for it.
That was very brave of you here. Therefore, I think we've had the debate. Can I move the offer's a recommendation that we grant consent and actually refer it to the Secretary of State for his consent? Can I? Paul? Thank you. I'll do a name vote as normal. John? Just for Andrew's benefit, obviously, we do a name vote here on A, so it's for or against or abstain. John?
For.
And Tom?
For.
Ed?
For.
Fee?
For.
Andrew?
For.
Philippa?
For.
Paul?
For.
And I will vote for, so that's completely granted. Thank you for your time. We'll now move to the second item. Right, I'm going to call again public forum people to speak, of course. Again, can I reiterate, we have had copies of your full statement, so if you can follow the traffic light system and retain your summary, just do it 1 minute, please. Miss Priest.
Last time I was here for the Marksby Road application, councillors were told if this site was a nature habitat, we wouldn't be here. Yet, here we are. I wanted to talk about the bat surveys we did here, but instead I'm begging you to believe me that Longmore Village is a disaster waiting to happen. I say this as a first-time buyer who's moved 10 times in the past decade. I've experienced the housing crisis, which is how I know this won't fix it. On paper, most issues are conveniently explained away, but this is all fantasy. Would you eat at a restaurant that hired its own food inspector? Because that's what we're doing here. I guess I'd believe them too if I wasn't raised by someone who spent their entire life building houses. We all know we can't rely on conditions to be enforced. We can't rely on the EA to keep sewage out of our water, so you're dreaming if you think that they can keep a billionaire in check. The truth is, you are the last line of environmental protection we have. Our future's in your hands tonight. Over 6,000 residents signed a petition to save Ashton Vale. The Green Spaces motion will mean nothing if this is approved today. Don't let our voices be drowned out by promises of profit. If you do, it'll be more than our voices underwater. Thank you.
Thanks. Amanda Sutherland, please.
Good evening, Chair. I'm here today on behalf of ETM Recycling. Hopefully you've all read our views about the concerns We are not against this development. I should make that very clear indeed. We think more housing, we think the sports centre, it's a great idea. It just can't go next to our site. Our site handles most of the recycling waste in Bristol. It causes noise, it causes smells, it's in a protected area for industrial use. And you are proposing to put housing so close to it that people cannot go outside in the summer, that they will have to keep their windows closed on their houses to achieve a safe level of noise. Thank you.
Thanks. Mark Ashton.
Chair, before you start the timer, if I may, there's a couple of matters that I think are before the committee that I've requested. Firstly, whether or not this committee is prepared to disclose council's advice and advice.
If I just interrupt, Mike, I've actually invited a legal officer up here to address that immediately after the officer's summary, of course, and to take questions from the committee, of course. So if you wanted to actually go to the crux of your point, please.
Well, there's just one other point. I'm sorry, Chair, to take time. As you know, there was some late evidence submitted, I think, on Monday, which we've responded to. I'm disappointed to see that the officer has not referred to our response to that in his addendum report. And so I did ask you in an email whether or not you'd give me a little more time to address that issue as well. That relates to the Nature Conservation Officer's secondary comments on the matter. I'm confined to a minute. You know, if I must, I'll try and ram it into a minute, but I think I might need a little bit more, so I beg your indulgence.
Can I say, in the spirit of being helpful, can you try to summarise your points in 2 minutes?
Thank you very much, Chair. As far as the Nature Conservation Office is concerned, there are two matters which they raised, or a number of matters, in fact. One of it, that this area was not within the West of England Nature Partnership, Nature Partner Network, and we submitted evidence to say that that's incorrect, that it is within the strategic network, and I think I did actually copy our comments to that, so I think that's a factual error that the officer has made. The other point made, of course, as we've made it in our other points, is that the officer suggested there's a biodiversity net gain of about 5%. We argue that's actually a loss on their calculation of 5.4%, whether or not the strategic element is high or low or medium. But one thing that's concerned is that the officer has not addressed the very detailed arguments we made why the biodiversity net gain calculation has not given proper valuation to the tree habitat on the site. The applicant's biodiversity net gain says it's 0.09 hectares. We say it's just over 0.3 hectares, and that's what makes the difference between our two calculations. I think that's critical. I made some comments about some suggested changes to the conditions that the officers recommended. No doubt officers consider those in due course. The crux of the matter, as far as we're concerned, is whether or not there are very special circumstances which justify this committee overriding the very onerous duty to protect Greenbelt. Hopefully the committee has read my statement about that, but we believe the applicant's so-called very special circumstances do not justify overruling the protections provided by the framework, BCS 6 and the Greenbelt site. They are sufficient of itself to justify refusing this application. I was concerned to hear Councillor Brown suggest that the proposal that the development of the Ashton Gate site was only viable if the sale of this site with permission is...
You've now had 2 minutes.
We've got a lot of people marked to cram in, of course, so we have read your actual statement, of course. Miles Thompson.
Standing up for this site does not mean being against the sporting quarter, but greenbelt land is important in local and national planning. The council passed a motion to protect the green belt. This site still serves its greenbelt purpose. Building roads on it does not degrade it, it keeps it open, the main characteristic. Back in 2009, both a stadium and housing was planned on this site. The houses were to financially unlock the stadium. The planning officer then said houses did not outweigh the damage to the greenbelt's openness, so they were removed from the plans. In 2022, we do not see any compelling new, very special circumstances. And as far as we can tell, the council's legal counsel does not say they found any either. They say it is up to you. So please protect this site and reject this application. Thank you.
Thanks. And Alan Morris. Mr. Morris, I think we had your twin brother in the previous debate.
Yes, it's the same point. It's the desire line between the park and ride site and the stadium. Thank you.
Can I congratulate you on your brevity, of course? Carol Durant.
So this is a statement from Friends of Suburban Bristol Railways. So if permitted, in its current form, Longmoor Village will have a detrimental impact on the upgrade of the Portishead line and on the reopening of Ashton Gate station. The Bristol Portishead Railway reopening was originally intended to provide a half-hourly service in both directions. The current scheme is for an hourly service in each direction with 45-minute service at peak times. The Longmoor Village development will prevent the service being upgraded to half-hourly by removing the potential for an alternative access road from the A370 to the Ashton Vale trading estate, which would allow the Winterstoke Road level crossing to be closed. FOSBA asked Bristol City Council to take note of Network Rail preference submitted last year and to reject the application in its current form, ensuring that a corridor across the land is ring-fenced for a future access road.
You've had 1 minute.
Thank you.
Councillor Fitzjohn.
Longmoor site is bang next door to a town green, which has fantastic ecology. And it just feels like a lost opportunity to be putting housing onto something that could be an amazing place for Ashton Vale, for Bedminster, and for generally for South Bristol. A whole new identity could come out of this area. I'm not against the stadium. I think it's a good idea. But please, I just don't think this is exceptional enough to remove the green belt.
Thank you. Councillor Bradshaw.
Thank you, Chair. This is a very sensitive piece of land, and I do understand the emotion and the concerns, but we also need affordable new homes. And this site will deliver at least 150 affordable new homes. And I want to make the point that because this is an outline application, that commitment needs to novate, it needs to be binding on the developer who ends up building them. Because I've seen situations where developers have tried to get out of obligations like this. So it's massively important that it's plan compliant. My statement also refers to the town and village greenland, which is next door, and other green space nearby, including the walk along Collitters Brook. This needs protection and management, and the local community needs support to better manage it and enhance it for the long term. I also raised the need for children's play, and I've had discussions with the applicant about how that could be
You've had 1 minute.
accommodated. There's also the issue around construction traffic as well. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Jamie Brecknauer, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name.
That's okay. As a local resident of Ashton Vale, I have to object to the housing on the Longmoor Village site. Currently, there are major concerns in Bedminster and South Bristol more generally about access to medical care and access to dental care. The average number of patients at a GP surgery in England is just over 8,000. Bridgeview Medical in Bedminster has 39,000 patients, and the Bedminster Family Practice has 12,000. Trying to get an appointment at either of these practices involves waits on the telephone of up to 2 hours and often having to call back 2 or 3 days in a row. Dental surgeries are worse. In Bristol, 98% of dental surgeries are not accepting NHS patients. Adding another 500 family homes is not fair and not safe. The council should tell the government that no more housing will be built until suitable investment in the NHS has taken place. There can be no climate justice without social justice. There is no social justice without equitable access to NHS healthcare services.
Thanks. I got down Martin Griffiths, but I'm guessing it's Lisa Knight.
We hear what you're saying about affordable housing. We get it, and we want to deliver it. Longmoor is a former landfill site cut off completely by the Metrobus route. The proposal is to build 510 new homes, with at least 30% of those being affordable housing, with aspirations to go higher. To be clear, the receipt from Longmoor is to be fully reinvested in the new Sports and Convention Centre. Without it, we can't proceed. It will underpin the delivery of a large extension to our current social and community-based activities. The increased cycle and walking routes that we've added, along with the Metrobus, provides a highly sustainable location for housing. Officers confirm that it will improve the biodiversity on the site. It helps the local authority address a critical housing shortage. We are committed to creating a Friends of group for the wetlands area, which could include a play park or a nature trail. It's an opportunity to provide huge private investment at a time of significant economic need, which will benefit
You've had 1 minute.
generations of Bristolians for years to come.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, Andrew Cockett, please.
Longmoor is a logical and sustainable site with easy access to Metrobus. Proposed in the emerging local plan for housing, it's an ideal opportunity to create a 20-minute neighbourhood. Greenbelt has been thoroughly assessed. The former landfill makes limited contribution, confirmed by the council's own study. Metrobus has permanently changed its context. Very special circumstances exist due to the enabling link to the SCC, the sport, health and housing benefits with significant affordable. It will have a huge economic impact. The compelling benefits clearly outweigh harm. Ecology has been assessed by 2 council consultees, both conclude a biodiversity net gain. It's been demonstrated that housing can coexist with the adjoining commercial uses, provided they operate in accordance with their conditions. Any future plans will be controlled in the same way. Drainage and flooding issues are agreed with the EA. Longmoor is critical to the vision. Without it, the significant regeneration and socio-economic benefits will
You've
be
had
lost.
1 minute.
Thank you. Thank you all for your submissions. Can I now move to the case officer? And perhaps I could remind you just to pick up Councillor Brightshaw's comment. This, unlike the previous one, is an outline planning application, so it's about the things like the land use, and the egress and the access, but all other matters would actually be subject, were committee minded to support it, to a subsequent full application. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. As I previously mentioned, the application is made at outline with all matters reserved except the proposed main vehicle access. The application comprises 510 dwellings with 30% being affordable. It's a phased residential-led development. It also includes commercial and community floor space within the centre of the site. Just to note that this could potentially be used to provide GP surgeries and dental practices. The application also comprises amenity green spaces, natural and semi-natural green space, provision of associated infrastructure, including footpaths and cycleways, a new vehicle and emergency access, and the provision of associated engineering and landscaping works to include SUDS, which is Sustainable Urban Drainage Systems. So the application site is outlined in red. It measures 10.5 hectares and is located on a former landfill and lies within the green belt. You'll see the site is surrounded by development on three sides. To the north here, we have the David Lloyd Gym. To the northeast, this is the ETM Waste Recycling Centre, beyond which is the Carla Trading Estate. This is the Mannheim Car Auction Yard. Running along the entirety of the southern boundary is the Metrobus Road, linking the Park and Ride to Winterstoke Road. To the south, we have the now built-out Ashton Ride residential development. This is residential development at Ashton Vale. To the immediate south of the site is the designated Town and Village Green. This is also a site of nature conservation interest. This is the Collaters Way, which is a bus route leading to the south. To the northwest, we have Long Ashton Park and Ride. This is the A370, and beyond which, this is Ashton Court, which is a Grade 2 star listed registered parkland. Just a few more photos for you. This is the proposed vehicle access to the site taken from the Long Ashton Park and Drive access. This is the view northeast along the Longmoor Brook. I think you can just about see the stadium in the distance there. This is the view southwest from the northern site boundary. So the Metro bus infrastructure runs along here. It's not clearly visible because it's slightly lower elevation. This is the view view west from the eastern site boundary. So where these trees are, that's a boundary to the Mannheim Car Auctions. In the corner here is the ETM site, and then this is the David Lloyd site. In the far, in the distance, you can see Ashton Court. This is taken from the existing Metrobus lane. This is the pedestrian bike shared cycle and pedestrian link. Again, here's the view northwest with David Lloyd Gym there, Ashton Court over there. This is the SNCI, which is outside of the development boundary. The development will only go here, and there'll be a substantial buffer between the two. Again, this is the existing Metrobus infrastructure. So this is Parameter Plan 01, and this shows the development extents and the land use. The purple hatching indicates where the C3 residential use is going to go. The green hatching in the middle indicates where the Class E, F commercial and community use could be. Again, this could be potentially be a GP surgery and dental practice. The grey hatching to the south here, this indicates the designated town and village green. Again, you'll see that the red line terminates at the Metro bus, and there's no development proposed here on the SNCI. To the northeast corner here, you'll see that there's this semicircle. Now, this is because this is an exclusion zone, so this pulls back any C3 development away from the ETM site. And this has been carefully negotiated with the applicant and the council's pollution control officer, because the noise mapping indicates that this is a 55 decibel range, which is not considered completely acceptable for outdoor living spaces. So all the residential development as proposed has been pulled back from this boundary and is now in what is considered to be an acceptable decibel range. As the application's only made an outline, we can't demonstrate full noise mitigation measures at this stage, but officers are in negotiations with the applicant in relation to a pre-commencement condition which will seek additional and quite strict noise mitigation measures be demonstrated at reserve matters stage. Now, this has been quite a lengthy process, and so we've got the council's pollution control officer Mark here tonight to talk about this in more detail, and Roy sat next to me is also the council's solicitor, and we can talk about whether the existing arrangement between ETM and what needs to be considered and what doesn't need to be considered at this stage. The second parameter plan we have here relates to height. So you'll see the pale blue. This plan, it demonstrates the the zones of maximum height. It doesn't mean that everything built in these areas is going to be as tall as I'm saying, but it demonstrates an indicative way of assessing what the impact of height will be. So the solid blue indicates a maximum height of 11 metres, which is your typical 2 to 3 storey housing. So this is where, as I say, normal traditional terrace, semi-detached and detached housing will be. The dark blue hatching indicates a maximum height of 8 metres, which is typically about 5 stories. So this demonstrates where any taller blocks of flats would be, say. Parameter 3 relates to access and movement. It details the crossing points over and under the Metrobus, which are here. Here there's an underpass. Here there's various crossings leading to the SNCI and also to Ashton Vale to the south. The plan also details the main vehicle access point to the northwest. You'll see here, this is the eastern boundary with the Mannheim car auction site and the Carla trading estate. Now these little points here, these indicate indicative areas where any future pedestrian links to Ashton Gate could be potentially brought forward if at any point in the future this piece of industrial land is going to be brought forward for housing. The application also proposes improvements to the existing pedestrian and cycle infrastructure running along the Metrobus link. Part of the Section 278 contributions that will be secured by Section 106 will improve additional lighting into these areas, and so it's considered that this is an improvement to the existing pedestrian link between the proposal site and the Ashton Gate site. Parameter Plan 4 relates to the Green Infrastructure Plan. This parameter plan describes the location for the green infrastructure and the open space areas which will accommodate the SUDs, the play areas, natural and semi-natural green space and amenity green spaces. You'll see in green around the site there's a landscape buffer. This is between about 5 metres and at some points 10 metres. The blue hatching shows a green corridor running through the site. So this is where the majority of the tree planting will go, and then this is the heart of the site here where there'll be additional green amenity space. The red hatching in the northeast corner, which I've already discussed, this has been shown as being a potential public open space, and so it won't be residential gardens, it will be amenity space with further, the dwellings pulled away from this area, which is considered to be a little bit too noisy. The grey hatching to the south, this indicates a site of nature conservation interest. The yellow, which also comprises also is beneath the grey hatching, this is the town and village green designation. The black zigzags these show which will be active frontages. So this, it's things like the dwellings will be fronting here, and there'll be play spaces and whatnot. So this is the part of the application that's made in full. This is the proposed access general arrangement plan for the proposed vehicle access. So this is the Long Ashton Park and Ride access. This is the Longmoor Brook, and this is the site. And so there'll be a lane coming in and a lane coming out, and this will be a culverted bridge, allowing the brook to run underneath. Again, this is an indicative master plan, which just kind of brings everything I've just been talking about together. This isn't by any means the final layout. It's just indicative as to how 510 dwellings could fit on the site. These slightly darker and purple units, these are the potential commercial and community spaces. You'll see that there's a big buffer between the development and the SNCI and the town and village green. Again, there's extensive landscape buffers around the site. So in terms of the consultation and public comments, similar to the previous application, it was advertised by neighbour notification letter, site notice and press advert. Following an amendment to the environmental statement, the application was re-advertised via press adverts on the 15th of June and 21st of September. 50 letters of support have been received, 258 objections and 5 neutral to the development. Again, I've gone through the key issues and the main objection issues are in my report, but the primary concerns relate to the following bullet points: harms of the green belt, impact on biodiversity and ecology, the interrelationship with the adjacent ETM site, flooding and impact on historic environment. So I'll touch on each of these now. Greenbelt assessment studies were carried out by both Bristol City Council and North Somerset Council, and both of which confirm that the site is considered to make only a limited contribution to Greenbelt purposes. The construction of the Metro bus route has changed the character of the site since the Greenbelt allocation, which was first designated in the development plan. As such, the site is allocated to be removed from the Greenbelt in the emerging local plan review. Taking into account the existing built form of the area, the findings of the submitted landscape visual impact assessment, and the details contained in the parameter plans which I've just been discussing, the proposal is not considered to have not to have an unacceptable level of detrimental impact on the openness of this part of the Greenbelt. In addition, the very special circumstances required to justify residential development in this part of the Greenbelt have been demonstrated by the applicant and are agreed by officers. Moving to the impact on biodiversity and ecology. The application has demonstrated a biodiversity net gain of 5%, as has been agreed by the council ecologist, who has not objected to the proposed development. It's to be noted that the biodiversity net gain assessment was not actually a validation requirement, because at the time the application was submitted, it was before the Environment Bill was passed and was given royal assent. The application was submitted in June and the bill was given assent in November. However, a further biodiversity net gain assessment will be required at the reserve matters stage, together with a wide range of other ecological surveys, mitigation, enhancement and management plans, all to be secured by condition. Some of the objections consider that the submitted BAT surveys are out of date. However, 2 council ecologists and the Natural England ecologist have all confirmed that the surveys are sufficient for the application to be determined, as they were all less than 2 years old when submitted. However, as a precaution, the council ecologist has requested further BAT surveys be undertaken and has advised a condition in this respect. In addition, Natural England are no longer objecting to the proposal, subject to a variety of measures which have been agreed by the applicant. Moving on to the ETM site, as I previously stated, the development area has been pulled away from the greater than 55 decibel range in the northeast corner adjacent to the ETM site. This means that the council's pollution control officer is now satisfied that adequate living conditions can be provided, subject to pre-commencement conditions to secure additional noise and dust mitigation measures. I've got Roy with me to discuss about some of the finer aspects of this negotiation, but in essence, it's only the existing operation at the ETM site that can be considered under the agent of change principle as set out in the NPPF. The EIA regulations also specify that it's only the cumulative effects with other existing and or approved projects that need to be considered as part of the submitted environmental statement. So this means that the as yet undetermined application at the ETM site does not need to be taken into consideration at this stage. However, like the existing 2017 consent for the operation at the ETM site, if approved, the as yet undetermined application will also be subject to various planning conditions and environmental permits that will seek to ensure adequate living conditions for any future residents of the Longmoor development. Turning to flooding, the Environment Agency raised no objection to the proposed development subject to various conditions. Similarly, the Bristol Council Flood Risk Officer also raised no objection subject to condition. Moving to the impact on the historic environment, Historic England haven't formally objected to the proposal but have raised concerns in relation to the impact on the historic setting of Ashton Court's Grade 2 star listed registered landscape, which lies approximately 400 metres to the north of the proposal site beyond the A370. Historic England have confirmed that the identified harm is likely to be less than substantial and towards the lower end of the spectrum. Their comment also confirms that it should be possible to mitigate some of the possible negative effects through good design via any subsequent reserve matters application. As detailed in my committee report, officers have undertaken the necessary balancing exercise and consider that the many public benefits that would flow from this development would outweigh this identified less than substantial harm. So the officer recommendation is to approve. The proposal will deliver 510 new houses, 30% of which will be affordable, at a time when the council cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing, so this is awarded significant weight in the planning balance. The application will also provide additional commercial and community floor space. As I've mentioned and is thoroughly detailed in my report, the site is no longer considered to contribute to the Greenbelt purposes. There was no unacceptable adverse impact on this part of the Greenbelt in terms of openness. The application has justified the very special circumstances needed in relation to the enabling of the Ashton Gate Sporting Quarter and the other citywide community benefits that both schemes deliver. The application site is considered to be a sustainable location with good transport, pedestrian and cycle links. There is a biodiversity net gain on site. Again, this wasn't a validation requirement, meaning the applicant didn't have to demonstrate this, but they have. And in any event at the reserve matters stage, another biodiversity net gain assessment will be required to be undertaken and will have to show a biodiversity net gain. Officers advise that on balance, the benefits of the scheme outweigh the limited adverse impacts that have been identified. Therefore, the recommendation is to approve, subject to conditions and planning obligations to be finalised and agreed under delegated authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Can I suggest that we park members' questions to the case officer on planning issues at present and invite the actual legal officer who is going to address firstly the tree forum's decisions, which I emailed upon receipt to the Director of Legal Services, and the ETM situation. Roy?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. I've been asked here to provide details to the committee and for public consumption of the legal issues that relate to the determination of this application and the particular legal concerns that have been raised by objectors. You may wonder where legal advice fits into the determination of planning applications, and essentially you may already be aware there are legal aspects to your decision-making process. That's where the law is relevant. As a committee, you are required to reach decisions in relation to planning applications in a legally correct way. And for the purpose of illustration, this means taking account of all material considerations and also setting aside any considerations which are immaterial or irrelevant to the application to be determined. Now, as your case officer has made out and as appears in the report, this application has been the subject of legal advice obtained not only from the council's own officers but also from learned counsel. And that advice has been obtained in effectively two stages. Counsel's advice has been obtained at various stages leading up to tonight, at various stages in the consideration of the application before you. So that was the first stage at which legal advice was obtained. And secondly, and more recently, counsel's advice and also my advice as the relevant council legal officer was obtained on the final versions of the committee reports and also on the specific issues raised by objectors which have already been expressed by objectors and considered by your planning case officer. So essentially we have a two-stage legal advice process which has led us to the report that's before us today. And that report in various stages, which I'll go through in a second, reflects entirely the legal advice that council and council officers have provided. Essentially, for simple reference, there are 4 areas of the report which have been the subject of specific legal input. Those are 1, the Greenbelt test, specifically the application of very special circumstances. Secondly, the relationship between this site, this application site, and the site you've just considered at the sports quarter, and whether there is a real and significant connection between the two sites. Thirdly, within your committee report here, the mechanism for securing planning obligations via a Section 106 agreement. And fourthly, the noise issues with particular reference to the concept of the agent of change principle, which I'll discuss in a second. If I can deal with those in turn. First, your report, I'm sorry I don't have page numbers, but it will be section C and the various subsections of that, harm to Greenbelt. This section deals with the fact that this application does represent inappropriate development in the green belt, and therefore, if it is to be approved, does require the application of very special circumstances. Relevant planning practice guidance says, when considering any planning application, local planning authorities should ensure that substantial weight is given to any harm to the green belt. Inappropriate development is by definition harmful to the green belt and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. Very special circumstances will not exist unless the potential harm to the green belt by reason of inappropriateness and any other harm resulting from the proposal is clearly outweighed by other considerations. So there's a clear imperative within national guidance that in a case such as this, where there is effectively inappropriate development proposed in a greenbelt location, that the applicant can call upon and the council can identify very special circumstances which support the grant of planning permission. In the absence of very special circumstances, the guidance clearly indicates that permission should be refused. So your case officer's report at section C deals with the section harm to green belt, heading C1, openness of the green belt and harm to the purposes of the green belt. And moving on, C2, very special circumstances, and a reference there to legal advice and counsel's opinion. The statement there, legal advice and counsel's opinion sought by the council has confirmed that it is the Sport and Conference Centre element of the proposed sports quarter development that can be considered to provide the community benefit which contributes to this part of the very special circumstances required to justify inappropriate development within the green belt. So that's one element out of several elements identified as very special circumstances, reminding members that this part of the report, in addition to the remainder of the report, has been scrutinised by council prior to its inclusion on your agenda tonight. So that analysis and that content reflects legal advice, and council is satisfied that that represents a statement of the legal position. Moving on to the second criterion that I identified, the connection between this site and the sports quarter site. This was the subject of early advice from council because council, and I think this point is also referred to in at least two of the objections to this proposal which was submitted to the council and before you this evening. Council's advice was it was not enough on its own for this site to deliver a financial contribution to the achievement of the sports quarter development. It was necessary for there to be a real connection between the two developments in addition to the financial connection. And council at the early stages of his advice provided officers with indications of the evidence which they would need to seek from the applicant to demonstrate this real connection. Members of the committee, that advice was taken on board by your officers, and the details of the connection between the two schemes is set out in your officers' report. If I can also move on to the third consideration, which also links to the one we've just discussed, namely the Section 106 obligations that you are directed to and recommended to secure, appearing near the end of your report. And there is a reference in your Section N of your report, planning obligations. There is a reference, draft heads of terms for necessary planning obligations which are to be secured by Section 106 agreement are listed as follows. Members should be aware that these are yet to be agreed and finalised between parties. They're yet to be finalised, but they have been run past council, and council is satisfied that these represent, in principle, an appropriate mechanism for securing the financing of the scheme, financing of the sports quarter scheme via this development. I'd highlight in particular points 1, 2 and 3 of the draft heads of terms, legally binding arrangement for proceeds of sale towards the construction of development of the sports quarter, including all enabling works. Number 2, proceeds of sale to be applied solely for the construction of development of the sports quarter, including all enabling works. And number 3, proceeds of sale to be held in an account separately and securely by the council. So Learned Counsel has considered those arrangements, and in his view, those are satisfactory to secure not only a financial link between the sports quarter and this scheme, but also a practical and meaningful practical connection as well. The 4th legal issue on which advice has been obtained, not only from council but also from your own authority's legal officers, is the issue of noise as raised by Ms Sutherland in her objection. And again, I take members to the officer's report and the section dealing with noise. Just a second. And this is under Section F, living conditions for future occupants. And your first heading is noise. There is a reference there to the concerns raised by ETM. That paragraph also says the agent acting on behalf of ETM has also raised criticisms of the mitigation proposed by the applicant to limit noise levels within the proposed properties at the northeast corner of the site. The report goes on to analyse the agent of change principle, which itself is derived from national practice guidance that states that planning decisions should ensure that new development can be integrated effectively with existing businesses and community facilities. Existing businesses and facilities should not have unreasonable restrictions placed on them as a result of development permitted after they were established. And your case officer has already placed emphasis, and correct emphasis, on the word existing. Where the operation of an existing business or community facility could have a significant adverse effect on new development, including changes of use in its vicinity, the applicant or agent of change should be required to provide suitable mitigation before the development has been completed. Your officer's report states the proposed development at Longmoor is the agent of change. So your officer's report correctly identifies the agent of change in this case, and also identifies what the applicant is required to do in order to meet the requirements of national guidance. Moving on to how this is dealt with by your officers in terms of their consideration of the evidence and their proposed way forward. They state, as the application is only made in outline, the exact mitigation details are not currently available and will be sought via a pre-commencement condition. The precise wording of that condition is set out not only in the conditions section, but also in a specific section of its own within this part of the report under the heading Acoustic Design Statement and Noise Mitigation Measures. This part of the report, as with the whole report, has been considered not only by your council's legal officers, but also by Learned Counsel, who was entirely content that this condition represented an appropriate way forward within the agent of change principle and also applicable national guidance in relation to noise. So, for the benefit of the committee, those are the areas on which legal advice has been obtained in connection with this application and its relationship with the sports quarter application.
Right. I may have actually misheard what you said, but did you cover actually the tree forum's concerns about the late submission of information?
Yes, Chair. As I understand it, the comments received from the tree forum on the subject of ecology were, as I understand it, not entirely new points before the authority, but merely expanding on existing submissions that had been received before. So the concerns of the forum were already aware or within the awareness of officers and were already to an extent addressed in the report. So it was open to your case officer and other officers to expand on that reasoning within the presentation if that was felt necessary.
In the interest of transparency, I'm going to allow members questions of accuracy to the legal officer, but I'm very conscious that we haven't yet quizzed the case officer about the planning issue, and it may be more points which are relevant here might well be profitably made in the debate, but if there are actual points of information, please ask. Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wonder if it might be, I'm aware of the time cracking on, I just wondered if it might be appropriate for example, Gary, just to remind us what this application is, that it's an outline application, and the difference, obviously, for a full public gallery between that and a detailed application.
Yes, more than happy to do that because it's really important in your decision making actually. So the application that you've just determined, that was a full application, all details known in the kind of the normal way. This application is different. It's outline, which is a red line around the site, but within, and it sets out a description of development. That's what's requested by the applicants. And there's probably two ways in which the detail of that is kind of fleshed out, really. One is the fact that the whole thing is subject to an environmental impact assessment, so that has to assess the worst case scenarios across a whole range of issues, and that's been done and revisited and publicised. The other aspect of which it kind of signals what the development will be are the parameter plans that Richard has put up on screen, and at the end of that there was an indicative layout, but that has to be treated as purely indicative. But before that, the parameter plans kind of highlight where the development will take place and where it won't take place within the site, the key kind of linkages between the site and the surrounding area, the height parameters as well. So they're all controls that are available to the committee as planning authority at this stage. If the committee were to resolve to grant outline permission for this development, then before any works were to take place on site, the applicants have to make basically another planning application known as reserved matters, and that is to kind of fill in all the details. So it's all the detail that you saw with the first application, but for this application. But the reserved matters, they have to comply with the parameters that have set out, because if they don't, then that's a whole new application altogether. And also the specific requirements around biodiversity, net gain, and also the noise and dust assessments in relation to the precise proximity of individual houses to, for example, the ETM site. So this is sometimes it can be quite understandably difficult for committees to grasp what are we approving here. So hopefully I've explained that as clearly as I can, really.
Thanks. Thank you for that, Gary. With that, can I thank the legal officer for his views, and bearing in mind your contribution now seems to be over, you're perfectly free to absent yourself. Can we go back to questions to the case officer? John? Is this questions to the case officer?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
Fine. So I just have two questions. Very often we're told, normally by Gary, to consider the application that's before you, or consider the application on its own merits. But there's an awful lot of references to the other application here. So I think I'd just like to understand why I should consider both applications together, albeit separately, and not the advice we're normally given of consider this application on its own merits. Because whilst it's obviously, hard that such a great application that we've passed, may not be affordable to the company that owns Bristol Sport without this, I have a real issue with the harm to the Greenbelt, and so and I'm a massive fan of affordable housing, so I'm really conflicted. So I think understanding why we should take into account somebody's finances to afford a development should be a very special circumstance of this one. That was my first question.
It's a good question. That's why it's taken so long to determine this application, because we've really had to delve into this issue and seek a lot of legal advice. I've mentioned the two sites because they're intrinsically linked. mean, we've gone through it so far tonight, but you can see from here. So there's the stadium site and here's the Longmoor site. This is going to part finance that site. So without the proceeds of sale from this site, that application can't go ahead. So that demonstrates a link, but the financial link alone isn't enough to serve as the very special circumstance. So in my report, I've tried to set out as clearly as I possibly can that in addition to the SCC delivering what is considered to be a city-wide community benefit, we've been through all the benefits: additional sport participation, cultural events, music events, comedy gigs, home for the Bristol Flyers. It also needs to provide a material and real link to this site. And so that's why, before when I mentioned there's a community access plan, this site, the future residents of this site will directly benefit from the Ashton Gate site because they will be given some sort of priority pass, discounted gym membership, discounted tickets to go and see events and whatnot. Also, this site will deliver improved pedestrian and cycle linkages for not just the residents of Longmoor, but for the residents of Ashton Vale and Ashton Rise by providing additional lighting along here. So this will provide the link before that members were talking about. So for people trying to access along the park and ride, there'll be a link through the site, a pedestrian link through the site that will link to the existing infrastructure that will be improved. And so it is a tricky one, and I've done my best in the report to summarise it as best I can. But we consider that the applicant has demonstrated the very special circumstance that justifies development in this part of the green belt, because, I mean, you can see for yourself, there is a physical barrier to this site, being the Metrobus. So it's already been effectively separated from the green belt, and it's surrounded by development. It just seems a logical place for this to go if you look at the map picture on its own. But my report and the legal opinion we've received and the many, many submissions from the applicant demonstrate that this site there is a link between the two sites, but they both have to be considered separately, if that makes any sense.
Just before I ask my second question, just very quickly on that, I assume you ask people to prove that the other site wouldn't go ahead without this one?
Oh, absolutely. The legal agreement is going to be really bespoke in that matter. This site is going to be subject to a phasing plan. They're not just going to build it all at once. So to ensure that the funds raised from the sale of this site are only spent on the SCC, the funds will be put in an escrow account that the council will control, and the funds will only be released once certain bits of the SCC are brought forward.
Yeah, no, sorry, that guarantees that money from the sale would be used for the stadium site, but it doesn't guarantee that they couldn't build on the stadium site without that money.
Well, the viability report that Jim's already discussed shows a significant deficit of about 49 million. That's reduced to about 25 million with the funds from this site going towards the development of that site. I don't know if you want to... Is anybody else to add on that, Jim? Is that a kind of fair enough assessment?
All I would say is that, interestingly, our concern was more the other way, that the developer would build out the residential and not build out the stadium site, because that clearly would then be, as Roy was saying, inappropriate development. So our main concern was that we ensured that any development on, or that the development on the sporting quarter site did happen. You cannot, though, you can't force anyone to build anything. So it would be possible, and Bristol Sport could not build the residential development and still build the Bristol Sporting Quarter if they chose to take that financial hit. You know, that's really their commercial decision. So they could do that, irrespective of whether, you know, of whether they chose to go ahead with the residential site. But our main concern is that they don't just do the residential and not the Sporting Quarter.
Thank you. And the second question, which I think is a very quick one, there's been lots of mention about the noise from ETM and the mitigations that could be put in place, but nothing regarding the smell that was mentioned. And there's a councillor for Avonmouth and Lawrence Weston. I have emails, tons of emails every week on the smell that goes from the bottom of Avonmouth to the top of Lawrence Weston, so say 3 or 4 miles. So I'm not too sure if pulling back the houses a little bit is going to mitigate smell. Is there anything more on that?
Oh, I'm sure Mark can answer that a bit more clearly than I can, but there is a dust mitigation measure condition also proposed.
I'll try and answer. As far as I'm aware, the ETM site predominantly takes in sort of commercial skips. It doesn't take domestic waste. It doesn't take putrescible waste. So smell is very much not an issue there. As you can see from the map, there are a number of commercial units right next door to the ETM site. We're not aware of any smell complaints to us or the Environment Agency regarding that.
John, are you right? Before calling Councillor Halfway, I've just got two questions. One to you, Richard, although it may be Jim wants to add there. Bearing in mind this is an outline application, the points being asked or made, are we able to provide any guarantee or expectation of the 30% affordable housing being delivered in stage 2 or in the detailed full planning application?
Well, the 30% requirement will be secured by a planning obligation. Again, at the reserve matter stage, if they want to revisit that, then we'll have to go through a whole new viability assessment. But I think the Section 106 alone is enough security we need at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, the Section 106 agreement, Councillor Eddy, will have to be entered into and signed before this outline application is granted, so before notice of decisions out. So the 30% affordable housing will be secured before any reserve matter application comes in.
That's reassuring.
We would not be looking to revisit levels of affordable housing on a reserve matters application.
Fine.
Government guidance is very much that once you've committed to some, I mean, going back a decade, government guidance was positively positive about developers renegotiating these things down after the sort of the economic crash of the back end of the 2008, 2009. It's now very different. It's now that once they've entered into it, that's the risk they've agreed, they've taken that risk, they're delivering that much of affordable housing, and it's not to be negotiated away at a later stage.
That's the answer I sought, Jim. Well done. My second question is to Pippa. We heard from the Friends of Suburban Railways that the granting of this application might imperil the regularity of the Portishead line. What's Transport's views?
We only just got the announcement that from Metro West that the scheme has been funded. It hasn't been fully approved yet, but the funding has been announced. There was never a plan for a station to be at Ashton Gate. It is about a 1 hourly reverse to Portishead. There is implications on it, and one of them is that the removal of the level crossing, which cannot go ahead unless we find alternative access for all the industrial sites that currently access from there. This outline design does not prevent us from doing that. We, as officers, have identified several options that could be considered, and as the Metro West develops, we will keep an eye on the reserve matter stages and make sure they do that to just add value to that. I have asked for 106 contributions at the beginning now to be able to do all the design of the new access arrangements, because it is very complicated there. So I agreed that with the applicant, that they understood that all of that needs to be designed so that when the first reserve matters come through, that is modelled appropriately to be deliverable.
Thanks a lot. Gary?
Yes, Chair. I just wanted to be really clear, though, with the committee that the outline application you're considering today would not secure those alternative access arrangements in the event that a half-hourly service would be provided. The reasons for that are we're still awaiting the decision from government on whether the hourly service has got development consent order, which is what they're considering, so there's still some uncertainty over that. There are no current policy requirements for the site that you're considering to provide access in that way. And also from studies that I think Pip has referred to, there are potentially other alternatives as well. So for all of those reasons, in liaison with our colleagues in the Transport Authority, we've not negotiated a reservation to provide such access, and so we haven't pursued that as part of this application, and we think that is right and proper.
Tom.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to come back to the very special circumstances again, just to delve into this community access plan a little bit more, because it strikes me that there's sort of three main elements to it. One of them is finance, although we have kind of heard that you know, we don't have to explicitly link the finance together. And the other one is about providing additional street lighting, which seems a bit, you know, weak to me. For me, I think it hinges a lot on this community access plan, and that's the real physical linkage between the two sites. So could you go into a bit more detail on that, like how that's negotiated and what that could include?
Well, that will form quite a lengthy part of the negotiations on the Section 106, which we haven't yet finalised. The community access plan, it won't just involve the residents of Longmoor going to Ashton Gate. There's also proposals for some of the foundations and charities that will operate from the SCC and the new offices that will come onto the Longmoor site and do various events. Again, we haven't got those details before us yet. This will form quite a substantial part of the Section 106 negotiations, which, if members were minded to approve the application today, we would then request delegated authority to go off and discuss with the applicant.
Thank you. So it doesn't really give me much more of a clear answer. But just moving on from that, the other thing I wanted to ask about was the objection from North Somerset Council. I wonder if you could go into some detail on that for me.
I don't know if you want to relate to the safeguarded access route.
I think, Chair, that's primarily about the vehicular access in the event of a half-hourly service to Portishead and back. So we have liaised closely with North Somerset about it, so we understand each other's position, but we've just got a different position really. So the advice we're offering the committee is that the development is acceptable in the light of that. North Somerset will have their own application to determine. However, they are only considering the access arrangements really, but it's open to them as a planning authority to take whatever decision they wish to make, but it's got to be a reasonable one. So yeah, we understand what North Somerset are saying, but for the reasons I set out, I don't think, you know, it's a reasonable requirement of this development.
Andrew?
Thanks. You'll be pleased to hear, Chair, that most of my questions have already been asked in one form or another. So my question is going to follow up on what Gary's just said, because I had questions about the North Somerset connection as well. So they've got concurrent application. Is that just for the access? Are they approving the bridge? Is that what the situation is?
That's right. I think,
or are deliberating on the bridge, obviously.
Yeah, I think it's really a small element, as it was with the stadium application all those years ago. They're really dealing with the access arrangements. So I think that the detailed plan that Richard showed, I think it's like the northern or the northwestern element of that is the bit that's technically within North Somerset. So we've got to be content with it as well, but also North Somerset have got to be in a position to agree it. So it straddles the boundary, yeah. So I think the lion's share of that diagram is within Bristol, but the left-hand element, the left-hand quarter maybe, is within North Somerset. So technically they have to approve it. We had the same situation with the stadium proposals years and years ago. Also, most recently, the YTL Arena as well. The building was within Bristol, of course, just about, but the access arrangements were within South Gloucestershire. So it's not an uncommon situation, actually, but really, I would say, it's not for me to advise North Somerset, but it's really for them to determine really what's before them, which is solely the technical access arrangements.
Okay, thank you. And do we know the timelines for that? Presumably their application must have been made around the same time.
I understand they are due to consider that in the very near future anyway. I think as is normal, they're waiting for us to determine the lion's share of the application, and then they'll follow quickly.
Ed?
A lot of my questions have been asked already. I'd like to thank all the people who wrote in comments. One of the comments was from a lawyer that said it may be unlawful to approve this, particularly in view of the fact that there's a pending application. And I'd just like to understand, because that seems to have been brushed aside by the planning officer, but we have a lawyer telling us that actually the pending application is a material consideration. That's ETM's pending application.
Yes, it is a pending application, but it's been in for quite a while now. I'm not the case officer from that, so I don't know the full details, but as I understand it, there's still quite a lot of information missing from that application before the council can come to an assessment. We've requested that from the ETM site.
I'm talking about the principle here, not the practicalities. If there is a pending application, is that a material consideration or not, regardless of how far advanced it is?
No, it's not under the agent of change principle that Roy's touched on. No, it isn't.
Yes, just to come in on that, Chair, I specifically quoted from national guidance which referred to existing neighbouring uses, and the word existing there is a reference to what exists at the time of this committee making its decision. So a prospective possibility of future planning permission doesn't fall within what is to be considered by this local planning authority under the agent of change principle. We're dealing with a more confined issue than what is a material consideration overall in the determination of this planning application. We're dealing with the question of the agent of change principle and what falls to be considered under that.
Thank you. The other one is planning inspector apparently when approving this road said it didn't really materially change the condition of the green belt. It was a minor change to that. So is that a material consideration that a planning inspector has ruled that it doesn't really materially affect the green belt, but we have heard today that that's the main reason that the green belt is materially affected?
Sorry, Councillor, I didn't quite understand the question.
So in 2012, there was a planning inspector made a judgment that the road, that the Metrobus road, did not materially really affect the green belt. What we've heard in this report is that the fact that that road is now in has really compromised the green belt, and that seems to be a bit of a discrepancy between a planning inspector and the planning officer's report, and I'm just concerned about that.
Gary?
I've scratched my head a little. I think the only planning inspector involvement on the site was, yes, it was a planning inspector appointed by PIN's planning inspectorate, but I think that was in advising the council over the town and village green issue, which is separate legislation. It's a separate issue. So I don't think that the committee and the local planning authority are kind of restricted in what view they wish to reasonably take in terms of what the impact or what role the current site plays in the openness of the green belt. I mean, we've put forward our view of that in the report, but individual members of the committee are perfectly open to take their own view of that as well. Our view is that it is significantly compromised by the kind of the physical construction of the Metrobus route, but equally members of the committee could say, well, actually, irrespective of that, we think that it makes a major contribution to openness and therefore the purposes of the green belt. So But I think in terms of reference to what a planning inspector's view was historically on this, I do believe that was in relation to the town and village green, which was kind of outside of the planning process.
Ed?
Last one. Again, in the comments, there's a problem that the noise, initial noise survey seems to have been done during one of the lockdowns and therefore may need not be accurate in terms of the prevailing background noise. Is that then there was a report that I really struggled to understand, submitted by opposition to this, which really seemed to come to very opposite conclusions. So I'm really struggling with that and wondering if we need to revisit the noise assessment in now we're no longer in lockdown.
The assessments weren't undertaken in lockdown. It was during when the COVID was an issue, but it wasn't during lockdown.
But we've got two reports now, one for the applicant and one for a neighbour, which really come to very opposite conclusions, and I'm just really struggling to square that circle.
Well, welcome to planning. We've got two opposing parties who've got two different consultants who've got different professional opinions, and so it's up to myself and Mark to kind of find the middle ground, but I can confirm that it wasn't during lockdown conditions.
Philippa?
I've just got two questions about the same issues really, but just, I think this is a yes or no answer. So if this is approved...
I love those.
So if this is approved today, then could there be different road access to the industrial site such that it wouldn't preclude the Portishead Railway being more frequent?
I think the answer is no. This application does not provide any alternative access to the industrial estate in relation to the Metro West proposals.
Does it prevent it in future?
Does it prevent it? It doesn't. Sorry, you said yes or no answer because
Sorry,
typical officer's not going to answer yes or no. It doesn't make provision for it within this application, but I would say it doesn't prevent it because the studies have been done and there are alternative ways of providing such access. So, sorry, it wasn't a yes or no.
Thank you. No, my question was a bit difficult to answer yes or no in the end. And then the other question is about the noise. So the people who live in that, if it was granted, people who live in that northeast corner, the little, that bit, yeah, that white bit there, if the ETM place continues as it does now, is it possible for their living conditions to be acceptable in terms of noise?
Based on the existing operation at ETM, if they follow the conditions and the environmental permits associated with their 2017 consent, then yes, we've got to a position where, providing that there is no housing or residential gardens in this area, adequate living conditions are provided. Now, once we get to the reserve matters stage, that's when we can really drill into what mitigation is being provided. It could be acoustic fencing, it could be buildings that haven't got any habitable windows facing that space. But in accordance with our own plan policies, the decibel range shown is broadly acceptable, and the council's pollution control officer is happy to proceed, provided that, you know, quite a stringent mitigation condition is applied to the application.
Can I suggest, Fee.
Maybe it's buried in the report somewhere. The reserve matters, will they come back to committee or will they be decided under delegated powers?
Yeah, it'll come to committee.
Oh, good.
Tom?
Thanks. I just wanted to ask a question about the biodiversity net gain. I realise that's not something that we have to give too much weight to because it's not currently policy. But I just wanted to understand a bit more about where this discrepancies come from. I'm a bit concerned that the tree forums come up with such a significantly different figure from the one cited in the report relating to the coverage of trees on the site. Especially given, you know, building on the green belt should be for exceptional purposes only, and you know, loss of biodiversity sort of rubs up quite against that.
Again, it's a difference between professional opinion. 3 council ecologists have now looked at this, and Natural England, and the most recent conclusion is that it does demonstrate a biodiversity net gain of 5%. Now, this figure is disputed between rival ecologists, but my understanding is that the matrix that used to calculate this is subject to interpretation. So again, it's a professional opinion of rival ecologists, but the council ecologist, who is the person I've got to listen to, is saying that there is a biodiversity net gain demonstrated. And again, there will be a further biodiversity net gain assessment undertaken at the Reserve Matters when it could go up, depending on what habitat plans are provided and further survey work.
Thanks. I just wanted to come back on that. Just to, in the comment from the tree forum, I understand there was no sort of rebuttal to their figure supplied. And the other question I had just relating to that was that one of the conditions recommended from Natural England was about providing mature trees as a replacement relating to horseshoe bats. And perhaps it's more of a question for the ecologist, but I just wanted to understand, what is the likeliness of that actually being realised? Are we coming up with a long list of important mitigations which may or may not actually be feasible when it comes to a future application?
Yes, it would be good if the ecologist was here tonight. She has provided a list of conditions that I've published, I think, onto the IDOC's website, so they're there for inspection. Again, it's a greenfield site, so there's every opportunity for all the conditions that are required to be demonstrated at the Reserve Matters. The Natural England one, they haven't actually objected. They just required some additional measures, I think, to do with access to the Longmoor Brook. They didn't want the EA to destroy the back corridor, as far as I can understand. Again, it's all quite technical, and I'm not an ecologist. But again, the council ecologist is supportive of the application subject to conditions, which will be, majority of which will be pre-commencement conditions. So there won't be any works being allowed to be undertaken until that those conditions have been fully satisfied. And again, it will come back to committee, at which point we'll probably have all the information we need to make the fully informed decision, and we'll make sure that we have the full set of conditions to be discussed on the evening.
P, because it's you, I'll allow you to ask the last question.
I was very swift last time. Just a clarification, 30% affordable housing, so that doesn't form part of the very special circumstances package, as it were, but it is a material consideration. Have I got that right?
It's awarded significant weight in the planning balance because we can't currently demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing. And
but it's not part of the very special circumstances thing. We're looking at the greenbelt issue.
Yeah, I would say it's a bit of a make weight within the very special circumstances. So, for example, if it was the only reason, then it put other greenbelt sites under pressure that, it's housing and, it's policy compliant in terms of affordability. That, in our opinion, that wouldn't constitute very special circumstances in themselves. But the big point on the very special circumstances in our point is that linkage and the delivery of the SCC within the site that you've just looked at. Really, you can then add in the housing delivery element, the affordability element as well. But in my opinion, they kind of make weight bits of the very special circumstances. So on its own, the 30% affordability doesn't meet the greenbelt test. It has to be added to the linkage to deliver the sports and conference centre.
So it is sort of part of the very special circumstances package. Sorry, I don't understand what make weight means. There we are, Gary.
It's sort of a minor element of very special circumstances. I think if the applicants were here today saying it's housing and it's policy compliant, we'd say, good on both points, but it's greenbelt. At this point in time, it wouldn't satisfy very special circumstances to allow development at this point in time within the greenbelt. But because it's a necessary part of delivering the sports and conference centre, that, in our opinion, sort of tips the balance towards clearly outweighing the harm to greenbelt. So it's something that members can have in their minds, but we're saying that it shouldn't be the primary reason to believe that there's very special circumstances.
Can I suggest we've actually asked all our questions and moved to the debate, and I'll kick off. As has often been mentioned, this is an outline application, so to me the key issue, and it has to be for everyone, is land use. At present, the existing local plan we're going on says that it's statutory green belt, which of course, unless the case is successfully made for special circumstances, means it's protected from development. The draft previous local plan, which you'll be aware the government rejected and sent back to us in 2019, proposed its use for housing. Ms. Price mentioned the Green Spaces motion, which was passed by full council almost a year ago. It was my honour to propose it on behalf of the Conservative group. It was amended by the Green Party, and I believe every single councillor here present voted for it. In honesty, it was actually, the wording was influenced by legal services, because clearly this council couldn't mandate the future development strategy of Bristol. So it was entrusted to deliberations by the all-party local plan working group, on which I'm privileged to serve. The recommendations are going out for consultation next month, so people will soon see what that's proposing. But earlier this summer, we looked at all the brownfield sites, and it clearly, actually, I was quite bullish for two main reasons. Firstly, obviously, like most members, I acknowledge the huge housing crisis in this city and the need to provide homes and affordable housing. And secondly, I personally knew, unless we actually develop the brownfield sites, officers would recommend we aid more into the green lungs. So I believe we had an obligation, a moral obligation, to be quite bullish about the brownfield sites. Later, we also looked at the various green lungs, and this is coming out for consultation when the draft report is published next month. And we did look at the three ones my motion mentioned: Yew Tree Farm, Western Slopes, and also Brislington Meadows. And the unanimous recommendation of members was that to actually safeguard those from development, and that will be in the draft local plan next month. I must say, though, I think it would be craven and dishonest to people out there to pretend that just by building on brownfield sites, we can meet Bristol's housing need. Unfortunately, the reality is we are going to look at other sites which, in an ideal world, we may have wished to preserve as green lungs. There are two issues to me which persuade me more about, or push me to a decision here. First of all, the Environment Agency, which had major flooding objections, have removed its objection. That, to me, was a red light which would have stopped any development. The other issue was Natural England, which had grave concerns, has lifted its objection, and that's a major factor with me. And many people have said, I do think we need seriously to look at what is on offer here, both in terms of the housing, the amount of affordable housing. We've heard from Jean Cliff the 30% is actually written in stone from here. And actually consider then whether we believe actually a reasonable special exception is made for us to say, look at this again. If we in principle voted for this, it would be referred back to the Secretary of State, who would obviously have to examine that in detail. I therefore actually have came to the conclusion that morally, politically, etc., and in housing terms, it would be appropriate to support this application. Paul?
Thank you, Richard, and I have to agree with everything that you've just said. Now, I'll be brief. Some may say that I mention this too often. 18 years ago, I was homeless in Bristol. I'm lucky enough now to live in a one-bedroom council property for the last 16 years. And I think more people, need to get that privilege. There's 18,000 on the waiting list. This isn't, as we've heard about, this is special circumstances. This isn't a precedent that's going to allow widespread building on the green belt. We've got 30% affordable housing, and we've also heard from the applicant earlier that there is possibly an aspiration for even more than that. So I'll be supporting this. Also, based on the fact that it is an outline, we're not authorising the building of any homes tonight.
Andrew.
Thanks, Chair. I've listened carefully to everything that's been said and listened carefully to what you've said as well, but I have come to the other conclusion on this. Not so much on the location and the site itself, because it's surrounded on three sides by buildings of one type or another, so and bordered on the fourth by the Metrobus lane. So I do appreciate that it's not necessarily fulfilling all the functions of Greenbelt as strongly as a lot of areas do. But for me, I would have been happier to have seen a detailed plan rather than outline permission. For me, there's too many loose ends, and because the applicants are planning to sell this with the outline permission, so we don't actually know what subsequent applications may come when the reserved matters are decided, whether some of these issues will be reopened by whoever buys the land, whether they might seek to reopen things like the viability calculations, etc., etc. I'm left unsettled by that, and I was further struck. I don't feel that the material and very real. I've scribbled this down and I can't read it, but sorry, let me just find the wording in the report on the very special circumstances. So it says, in addition to a financial linkage, there must be a material and real connection between the proposed development and the SEC, and I'm not convinced that's been demonstrated to my satisfaction. So it's on those grounds that I'm going to be voting against, I'm afraid.
Ed?
I echo a lot of that. I'm not able to support this, but I'm not against it because I just don't think we've got enough information. A lot of the information has come in very, very late. We got Council's opinion finally published at 8:30 last night. I think it's only fair to the people that have worked really hard to put in their applications that they should have been able to see that, and it was a transparent and open process that they should have seen that, and it is rather equivocal, Council's opinion. I think the Natural England, at the very last moment, we've seen them not approve this, but not object to it, and still some matters of concern. I think on noise and biodiversity net gain, there are very different opinions here, and those can't be resolved, and I'd like to see some sort of a critique of one another's reports so that we can have a better and more informed opinion. When it comes to special matters, what I've heard is there'll be some sort of access for residents to the sport and the gym. Well, that's not really enough for me to make a decision. Network Rail, I think we're dancing around this, but North Somerset clearly believe that they can object to this on the basis it's in their plan to go to a half-hourly service, and we don't have enough information about whether the land will be reserved. And overall, there's so many reserved matters here that I just have concerns. And then, of course, the BAP survey is more than 2 years out of date and needs to be renewed. I'd like to see a lot of these things being renewed, and I'd like to see more information. So at the moment, I'll have to abstain for lack of information.
Thank you, Ed. John.
Yeah, I don't really believe the very special circumstances. I think if this wasn't approved, they'd still go ahead and build the sports complex. I don't think they're going to blame the council for not passing this for the reason for not doing it. I don't think the link's that's important. There's loads of things I don't find very special, and I would have preferred if it had just been brought as an application in its own right. But that said, I do understand the massive need for housing in Bristol and the massive need for affordable housing, and only on the basis that I think this is going to be removed from the Green Belt is the reason I feel I can support this with a heavy heart.
Thank you, John. Anybody else? No. In that case, I now want to test the mood of the chamber, so can I propose the resolution or the officer's promotion to actually grant, subject to referral to the Secretary of State? Do I have a seconder? Paul? Then I'll do a name vote. I'll vote in favour. For? John?
For.
Tom?
Abstain.
Ed?
Abstain. I'd rather see this deferred.
P?
Abstain.
Andrew?
Against.
For?
For.
Philippa?
For.
And Paul?
For.
I declare that passed. Thank you very much for your time. As members know, I tend to actually find that strict bladder control is a very effective mechanism for efficient meetings, but I'm prepared to actually give a 10 minutes temporary adjournment. Shall we then meet again at 9:05? Oh, we will. Yes, it's not going to be. Yeah. Wait. Yeah. Gentlemen, thanks very much. we had 2 major applications and we have overrun, I'm afraid, so thank you very much. It may be that some of you may not have had the staying power that those of you who are here have. So I'm going to call the names, and if you're not here, obviously you can't respond, but when I call your name, if you could walk to the mic, it's already on, so you don't need to do anything other than speak. You have 1 minute to actually summarise your statement. All members have seen the written statement, so they've read the detailed application. So our first application is Claremont School. So I've got, and I do apologise about my pronunciation, Coral Duck Rock, is it? Yep.
I think I'm a bit shorter than the last person.
Yes, if you would. By the way, I didn't mention, just to wait you, we've got a traffic light signal here system. So when it goes red, you finish your 1 minute.
Okay. Councillors, I'm Coral Ducrow, Associate Town Planner at Stride Triglav, Planning Consultant for the application. As highlighted in the application documentation and presented by the, later to be presented by the Bristol City Council Education Team, there is a specialist education shortfall within Bristol, and that's quite a dire shortfall. Figures fluctuate slightly, and at the moment it's around 148 places short. The current provision at Claremont is outdated, not fit for purpose, and at its end of life, with some leaking roofs, etc. Throughout the planning process, we have listened to both council officer comments and, where possible, tried to take into consideration local residents' comments and thoughts, and made numerous changes to the design as set out within our written statement, including additional survey work, provided extra plans, illustrations, cross-sections, etc. The potential effects of this proposal on local
Your 1 minute is up.
Oh, right.
Sorry. But members have read your actual statement, so that's all right. Emma Richards.
Hello, I'm the head teacher at Claremont School. Claremont School currently has students from 2 to 19 years old. We are one school, but we're divided across 2 sites. The majority of our pupils at Claremont have physical disabilities, profound and multiple learning difficulties, and severe learning difficulties. A large number of our pupils have very complex medical needs, and many have life-limiting conditions. In September 2020, we also opened a class for autistic pupils with severe learning difficulties. Claremont School is not fit for purpose to meet the needs of the cohort of students. As a school, we aim high for our pupils. We believe they can all achieve. We want their experiences and education to be meaningful. We know we need to break down the barriers to their learning in many areas. In order to do this, we need a new school with the right space and technology. I believe that Claremont pupils deserve a school building which is so much better than the current
Your
one.
1 minute is up.
Thank you. Mr. Rockard. Sorry. Oh, well.
Sorry, it's Ian Bushell from Skanska.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Ian Bushell, Project Manager for Skanska Construction. Update on the construction management statement. We've been working with Bristol Council for over 15 years, and we have extensive experience delivering numerous tightly constrained jobs as part of the local educational partnership. We recognise the importance of managing the impacts on construction projects, and especially the impact this can have on our neighbours, especially around Claremont School. Claremont School will have a detailed project-specific health and safety, environmental and construction plan which will specifically focus on minimising impacts. Site hours will be limited as the planning conditions state. In addition, due to the proximity of the Henleys Infant and Junior School, we'll be committing to limiting construction delivery times to restricted periods. As with all our projects, we'll be signing up to the Consider Construction Scheme, and that commits us to various elements, in mainly being a good neighbour. These are core values to Skanska, and we've performed really well across Bristol. So Skanska's approach to ensuring and maintaining good neighbourly relations and communication ensure that the redevelopment of Claremont School can be safely constructed, not only to the benefit of the end users, but all those...
Your 1 minute is up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Richard Hanks.
I'm Richard Hanks. I'm Acting Director for Education Skills, Bristol City Council. So as you've heard, we do have a shortage of specialist places across the city, and our demands are increasing. So for the year 21-22, the authorities had to place 192 children and young people with EHCPs into independent providers, which has cost us around 10.3 million this year. So the number of assessments is also growing, so we see a 17% increase even in the month of July 2022, when we had 127 requests for needs assessment. So Claremont School is not in a good enough condition to meet the specialist service that they provide for teaching and learning. We want an environment that is conducive to that excellence that the head teacher referenced just a moment ago. And new and refurbished facilities would help provide that quality learning environment for these vulnerable children, but also the opportunity to expand the school will help us meet the growing needs in the city.
Thank you, Richard. Helen Lovesmith, please.
Hi, Helen Lovesmith, architect at Stride Treadline. Throughout the design process, we've worked closely with the school to ensure that their new facility will be fit for purpose to meet the needs of pupils and staff, both internally and externally, whilst respecting the unique surroundings of the site. Consultation with the closest neighbours led to some significant changes to the scheme, moving or omitting parts of the building that were closest to the boundary, changing internal arrangements of rooms and windows to prevent overlooking. Elevation materials were amended at the request of the neighbours, trees added, and glazing to first floor classrooms obscured to eliminate chance of views into neighbouring gardens. Fencing lines have been added to ensure that external public pupil areas cannot overlook the neighbouring properties, with areas closest to the neighbour's garden used for occasional deliveries and kitchen staff access only, improving on the current situation of play areas adjacent to the boundary. It's unfortunate that a modelling error meant that a hedge was shown at a greater height in some illustrative images. However, with obscured glazing already proposed, this does not affect the view into neighbours' gardens.
Your minute is up.
Councillor Scott.
We recommend investment in Claremont School and see this as positive. However, since the beginning, we've had concerns about the traffic, road safety and the impact on the building's mass on neighbours. We are not happy with how Skanska have dealt with local residents. Full engagement of community groups, neighbours and adjacent residents has been ignored. Skanska have not listened to the wider concerns at the consultations. Regarding the building itself, in spite of requests at the 3 consultations, the plan still sees buildings at the height that has been refused on the opposite side of the road and in very close proximity to a neighbour. Machinery is based on the roof nearest one of the residents, and the overbearing building is to be built on an oppressive dark brick which will add to its dominating appearance. We urge you to revisit these plans, attach rigid conditions on traffic and parking, request a travel plan, to move the rooftop machinery further away from the neighbouring property, and to request a change in the brick colour before approving. Thank you.
Thanks. And finally, Mr. Tomlinson.
Simon Tomlinson, neighbour. Imagine how you would feel if you suddenly discovered that your neighbour was planning to build a massive building towering 11 metres above your garden, just a few metres from your boundary. Imagine how you would feel if they failed to genuinely engage with you or make any serious compromise on their part. Imagine how you would feel if you raised your concerns through the correct channels, that those concerns were confirmed but then overruled. Well, that's exactly what has happened to us. Despite every impact being confirmed as being less than ideal, it looks like on balance we will all be sacrificed to create just 18 additional centre places for Bristol. without any evidence to justify why this is the only and the most cost-effective solution that can deliver them. We and all our neighbours have always been hugely supportive of Claremont School. We are not against a redevelopment of the school, just expansion to a size that is beyond what this small site at the heart of a quiet residential neighbourhood can take, a fact that no amount of spin can change. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Can I move to the officer and invite Tom to actually summarise in the customary 5 minutes? My liberal-esque streak is now exhausted, Tom.
Okay, thanks. I'll do my best. This application concerns Claremont School, which is located in Henleys in North Bristol. Claremont School is a special education needs school catering for pupils with profound and multiple learning difficulties who require specialist education and a bespoke environment, which helps to stimulate their learning. The school currently operates across 2 sites. So there's the application site, Claremont School, and also Redland Green School, which caters for a secondary school element and also a proportion of the post-16 education. So the proposed development will bring the whole of the school together at this one site at Claremont. The application site consists of the historic Claremont House, which is a substantial Victorian building, alongside later extensions and additions, as well as external space. Henley's infant school is located to the south, and there are residential properties to the north and east. So this is the existing site plan. You can see Claremont House, the historic building here, and these are the later additions which are to be removed following the development. And this is a proposed site plan showing the development. Oh, sorry. No. So just to confirm, this building here is the historic building, and the extensions are located to the south and east of that. So planning permission is sought for the demolition of the existing extensions and construction of a new 2-storey extension to Claremont House, alongside general refurbishment of the existing building. Alterations are also proposed to the front entrance and the parking arrangement, and also the circular drop-off area, incorporating the creation of new designated school minibus bays, several drop-off and pick-up bays, alongside some staff cycle parking where there currently is none. This is a breakdown of the existing capacity. So currently the school has capacity for 52 pupils at this site. Following the development, there will be 21 pupils from Redland Green who will be relocated to this site, and an increased capacity of 18 pupils, meaning the total pupil capacity will increase to 91. Staffing numbers will also increase from 70 to 103. This is a proposed visual of the extension, showing the general scale and design. So as previously mentioned, the 2-storey extension, which will largely follow the L-shaped form and footprint of the existing single-storey structures, albeit of a greater scale and height. These are some of the proposed elevations showing the overall design. The blue and pink windows showing there won't be that colour. This is just to indicate where obscure glazing and restricted opening windows are proposed to avoid any harmful overlooking of neighbours. So a number of revisions have been made to the proposal during the course of the application to address concerns raised by officers and residents. This necessitated 3 rounds of public consultation. Objections were received 8, 6 and 12 times respectively following that. These were predominantly in relation to potential amenity issues and also highways issues, as well as some concerns regarding noise and design. The key issues are covered in detail in the report. However, 2 areas I'll touch on briefly are the amenity and highways issues. So to go back to the proposed site plan, it's accepted that there will be some amenity impact on properties to the east. So that's these ones here, the bungalow, Claremont Lodge and Claremont Court. Specifically, there will be some overbearing impact and overshadowing given the increase in height and also the siting in closer proximity to the boundary. It's accepted by officers that this is not ideal. However, the applicant has sought to minimise this through the course of the application by making amendments to the scale, siting and design of the new teaching block. Following amendment and on balance, it's considered that these amenity impacts will not be harmful enough to warrant refusal and weighed in the balance with the nature of the development and the wider benefits. Of particular relevance and consideration in this assessment is paragraph 95 of the NPPF, which states it's important that sufficient choice of school places are available to meet the needs of existing and new communities. And it also says that local planning authorities should take a proactive, positive and collaborative approach to meeting this requirement and give great weight to the need to create, expand and alter schools. So in that context, great weight is given to the proposal and it's considered this is sufficient to outweigh any harm caused with regards to amenity. Similarly, with regards to highways impact, the application has been considered by the Council's Transport Development Management team, who raised no objections to the proposal on highway safety grounds subject to conditions. So subject to these being secured via condition, it's considered that any highways impacts can be mitigated to an acceptable level. The application is therefore recommended for approval on this basis, subject to the conditions in the report.
Thank you, Dom. I've got one question, not so much to you, but to Pippa. Obviously, we've heard traffic management are reasonably happy, of course. For the benefit, since we've had public forum, can you just confirm that and also respond to the case in response to Councillor Scott's plea for a traffic management plan? What would traffic say to that?
When we work with schools, we particularly look at road safety. In this particular instance, most of the pupils will be brought by minibuses into the schools, so their actual road safety is not the main concern. Also, the additional trips are quite minimal. However, we do engage with travel plans with the schools, and we can monitor it through that process for a while and see what the impact is, and we can apply for safe route to school funding to make remedial action if necessary. But in planning terms, this application has very little trip generation, and therefore there was no road safety direct things that wouldn't be covered in the normal safety audit that we do with the accompanying Section 278 works.
You know, I can understand from what you say it wouldn't be justified to attach as a condition. Do other members have questions? Tom?
Yep, two questions. One relating to Councillor Scott's issue raised about plan on the roof. Is there a condition that can be attached to that to make sure that, you know, it's not disturbing neighbours? And the other one was just about the loss of some category B trees in the development, and I just wanted to confirm really that all avenues had been explored in preventing the loss of those category B trees during the design phase.
I think those questions are back to Tom, of course.
Yeah, I can answer those. So regarding plant and equipment on the roof of the building, that concern was raised with the Council's pollution control officer, who's just left, so I can't refer it to him, but he did request during the course of application a noise assessment covering that plant and equipment, and the applicant did prepare that and provide that to the Council. And the Council's pollution control officer did review that, and it did confirm that any noise generated by that equipment would not be harmful to the amenities of surrounding neighbouring properties. So there are no concerns in that respect. The condition is, however, attached, and that's condition 37, setting out that the rating level of any noise generated by plant and equipment shall be no more than 30 dBA. at any surrounding property. So that's essentially the level of noise that is deemed adequate to protect the immunity of neighbours. So if the plant does creep above that at any stage in the future, then they would be in breach of that condition and enforcement action could be taken. With regards to the trees, it's accepted that some Category B trees will be removed, which isn't ideal. There are some more prominent trees in the site, however, some TPO trees and Category A trees which will be retained. The Category B trees to be removed are along this northern boundary here, and this is where a new covered walkway is proposed from the minibus stops to the main entrance. So it was looked at with the applicant whether or not they can retain some of these trees, but overall, given the requirements of the school and the need to provide this covered access for the pupils, it wasn't considered possible to retain those trees. But overall, all trees to be removed will be mitigated on site with replacement trees in accordance with the council's tree replacement standard. So the council's tree officer was happy with that.
I'm therefore moved to debate. This seems to me a bit of a no-brainer. Sorry? Oh, sorry, Philbert. Oh, sorry, I missed you.
I was just going to ask about, you said the developer had reduced the scale and massing of the project in response to some of the comments. So can you give us an idea of the extent of that reduction?
Yeah, I don't have any of the previous materials of the plans, but specifically this section here, which is the section closest to the boundaries with the neighbouring properties. Previously, the footprint of this was much larger and it was of a greater height, but this has been reduced to, so this element is only a single storey, whilst the rest is 2 stories. So officers were satisfied that the reduction in the scale of this and also the siting away from the boundary was sufficient to avoid any harmful impact on these properties.
All right. Philip?
I know it's in there somewhere, I have read it, but I can't find it again. What was the distance between the neighbouring properties and the first floor new building?
So this distance here is that's approximately 22 metres, which in itself is sufficient to ensure that there'll be no harmful overlooking. Notwithstanding that, all the wind. Sorry, I keep on losing the mouse. Oop, and I've lost everything. All the windows on this elevation at first floor level will also be obscure glazed and restricted opening. So despite that distance being relatively substantial, it's considered that there would be no harmful overlooking across the site.
Can you just remind me of the guideline distance between for overlooking back to back?
Essentially anything over about 19 metres is usually deemed acceptable on that basis.
Right. So we move to the debate. As I was saying, this seems to be a bit of a no-brainer. We're almost doubling the number of special needs kids who'd be schooled here at Claremont School in modern conditions rather than what they face at present. Obviously, there are concerns about the egress and egress and the relationship with the neighbouring properties, but we are assured by traffic and planning that actually we don't have grounds to actually fear that. Obviously, it's not a commercial undertaking, it's a community school, so I'd expect them to be sensitive to the needs of their neighbours, of course. Paul?
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I mean, we're desperate in Bristol for SEN places. This will give us an extra 40 children and also an additional 33 jobs for staff as well. Improved teaching and learning facilities. And I'm happy overall that conditions imposed will mitigate any downside. And on balance, the additional SEN places override any other considerations, and therefore I'll be voting for it.
Does anyone else wish to speak? Fee?
mean, whilst I would also be voting for it, I do have some sympathy with the neighbours, because quite often I think until you encounter planning policy yourself, you don't realise just how constraining it is and what would appear to the rest of us to be, you know, when it arrives on your doorstep as being an unreasonable demand from a development, is actually completely compliant with policy. So sympathies, but you know, it's a good thing happening, and it is compliant with policy from what I can see. So whilst I sympathise, I'll be voting for it.
Ed?
I echo that. I would like to see a strong travel plan put in place, but albeit that the trip generation on this is quite low. It would be great if we could see that the machinery on the roof could be recited, because I'm not convinced that if enforcement action was required, it would be taken. And I'm not sure it would be better to get it in the right place from the word go rather than try and move it at a later date. And I'd like to see, and it's probably not a material consideration, but I'd like to see that there's a much larger than, I think it was 19 net gain spaces. So I hope that Redland Green will continue to use the existing provision. It's probably not material, but for special needs education, so we get a much higher net gain anyway.
Gary?
Yes, Chair. I think in terms of the rooftop plant issue, I think initial concerns were raised and further information was submitted by the applicants, which was then assessed by pollution control colleagues. So as the officer position is that the rooftop plant is acceptable in its location, subject to it meeting the technical specifications that have been provided. So in our view, it's not a position that it needs moving because we've had sufficient comfort about it.
I'd like to move consent. Do I have a seconder? Philippa, thank you. I'll do a name vote. John?
For.
Tom?
For.
Ed?
For.
Fee?
For.
Andrew?
For.
Farah?
For.
Philippa?
For.
Paul?
For.
And I'll vote in favour, so that's unanimous. Thank you very much. We now move on to our final Colston Yard. I think the dramatic personnel are just changing. Again, as I said to the previous public forum, my apologies, we had a heavy agenda, so it overran. I understand that some people weren't able to be here. The first person I've got is, by the way, I see you came in later, so obviously when I call you by name, please head to the central mic. Jeremy on my left has actually a traffic orange, green, and red. Obviously, you've got 1 minute to summarise your statement. All members have read it in the last 24 hours. Mr. Duberson, sorry if I mispronounced that.
I'm afraid that if the committee approve the hotel scheme, then the disruption caused during construction and the subsequent problems associated with a high-density building will result in an irreversible decline of this unique area. As a resident and business owner of over 30 years in Colston Street, I know how fragile the economy is here, and for example, the use of parking spaces for many months by the constructors will pretty much shut most of the businesses at the top of the street. While meeting the needs of one developer, a whole host of residents and business owners will once again have been ignored, while large profits are generated for people with no real investment in the area. When are the people who help build up these areas, cherish them and live work in them going to start getting a say in how they evolve? Once these areas go and we are just left with ghettos of HMOs full of transient people, there will be no going back. I would trust the application will be refused for the good of the wider area. If it is approved, please could we ask for a condition be imposed that a full impact assessment of the construction process and a geological survey of the site be carried out to make sure it is fit to hold a 7-storey building.
Thanks. Mr. Goulding.
I live in the basement flat of 72 Colston Street with my family, including 2 children aged 11 and 1 year old, in the midst of a densely populated residential street. My flat faces directly onto the proposed building site. My bedroom, my children's bedrooms, my living room all face onto the site less than 8 metres away. Due to the height of the development, the fact Colston Street slopes down and my flat is below street level, the block would tower over my flat, blocking all sunlight and significant daylight from my windows and turning the currently sunny garden my children play into a cold, shaded enclave. There are numerous noise concerns that could disrupt my family life, including multiple windows facing us and a huge bank of 24/7 heat pumps over my wall. On top of this, my partner and I work from home. Our youngest child is at home all day, requiring naps and feeding meters from a proposed 18-month building site. I've lived here for over a decade, brought my daughter up here, and have a new son. Given my proximity and long-term investment in this area, it's frustrating I was not consulted by the developer. This development is far too big for the site and will disrupt a delicately balanced historic residential area and cause untold harm and disruption to my family home.
Mr. Caswell.
Good evening. On behalf of the Christmas Steps Quarter residents and traders, the proposed 7-storey hotel in historic Colston Yard has received 69 objections from our community, plus Bristol Civic Society, the Conservation Advisory Panel, the Christmas Steps Arts Quarter Planning Scrutiny Committee, and from our ward councillor, Annie Stafford Townsend. Colston Yard is a very constricted site, served solely by a narrow entrance tunnel between shops. It has a unique character and contains a fascinating mix of small, intimate studios and workshops. Previous chief planning officers, such as Steve Perry, have been very keen to preserve the unique traditional
Your minute
character.
is up.
Sorry?
Your minute is up to speak.
Oh.
Sorry.
Sorry.
But
Thank you.
Members have read your statement. Dawn Shorten, please.
Good evening. I, along with my neighbours, object to the application for planning permission for a large-scale hotel development among the small artisan workshops of Colston Yard, backing onto our homes. This development is far too big a mass, is far too high, and would tower over and cut out light to our gardens and homes. It will overlook our gardens. There would be a privacy issue, and it dominates the view from Lewins Mead. It doesn't complement the aesthetic of the conservation zone, and there are many historic listed buildings, so will detrimentally affect the character of the area. This development will produce noise and mess. There's already a proliferation of bins left in Colston Street from HMOs and flats in Johnny Ball Lane, the Yard and Colston Street. Rubbish is left to accumulate around them, so now there's a serious rat infestation. This proposal would have a massive impact on parking and traffic flow in an already sensitive site. The yard itself is small and has one narrow entrance. Regular visits from service vehicles as well as taxis, etc. will produce noise as well as produce pollution and congestion. Traffic in the area is already dire. Ambulances trying to get to and from the hospital.
Your minute is up.
Okay. And parking's awful as well.
Erica Dubison.
Hello. I'm a resident of Colston Street where my business is too. Most residents and businesses are against this application because it will cause massive disruption to the area. Businesses with beautiful frontages will have them hidden by building work units on Colston Street. Visitors to the area will have their experience disturbed by noise from the building works. This will affect the business's trade, and a vibrant community that is cherished by visitors and residents of the city will die. Businesses will close and another apartment block, stroke student block will exist. It's amazing how many apartment hotels are opening up where one-bedroom student blocks are not allowed by the council plans. The scale of this development is out of proportion and keeping with the area. We would welcome a development that was smaller and allowed people who had a vested interest in the area to live there. Poor access to the site will cause long-term problems. I question how people can be safely rescued from this block in the event of a fire and how they're dealing with their waste collections. Thank you.
Mr. Wilkinson.
Good evening. I'm the owner and business owner of number 68 Colston Street, a house which is currently 336 years old, so it's seen some changes in its time. This development is simply too big for the area. 22 apartments and a 7-storey building in Colston Yard is just too much. It's a narrow access into that yard, and it would generate extra traffic flow in the street, both vehicular and pedestrian, which currently runs all day and all night long and is increasing all the time. Then there is a construction phase which is scheduled to last for 2 years, resulting in a further loss of parking bays, storage units on Colston Street itself, and more disturbance for the site. Finally, I'll just make the comment that this development does nothing of any benefit for the site, rather possibly the least appropriate scheme for that site. I suggest it should be rejected and finally laid to rest.
Thank you. Mr. Pemble.
Thank you, Chair. I'm representing the applicants. I won't dwell on the finer points of the scheme because the presentation by your planning officer will go through that in detail. But development of this site follows a previous permission, albeit a while ago, for a not too dissimilar sized scheme. The proposals have been reduced in scale during the course of this application being processed, with the quantum and scale being amended. It is a very complex site to develop. It's got challenges, yes, but it can be done. There's been other similar sites in the city that have been developed, and with careful management, minimum disruption can take place. The visuals that have accompanied the application demonstrate how it fits into the context of the area, and the architects have very carefully considered that built context as well as the amenity impacts on near neighbours. I'm not convinced by this chap what he said about overshadowing. I think he's got the aspect of it wrong. It's a high quality scheme. It's suitable for a
your minute is up.
Location, and I hope you endorse the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Stafford Townsend.
The reasons to reject are outlined in Statement 3. It's too big, the infrastructure can't cope in the local area, and the loss of light to neighbouring properties. It's a residential live-work area. Residents have outlined their concerns, businesses have outlined their concerns. It's one of the worst congested areas in the city, and active travel is already under strain. The previous application is massively larger than the previous application, and the area has dramatically changed in the last 14 years. I've got extreme concerns regarding the knock-on impact of this development for local residents and businesses, both during the build period and in operation, and the lack of consultation from the developer does not remove these concerns. There's no demonstrated need for the development, despite what the developer says, and it's an incredibly complex site and development that will negatively impact every surrounding resident and business and visitor, and it only serves to benefit the developer. So please reject it, and if you're minded to approve, can you at least hold a site visit so you can see the site and condition that a Bristol City Council geological survey is part of the condition. Thank you.
And finally, Chris Binding, please.
As a Colston Street resident for over 30 years, my main concern with this development is to do with scale and the negative impact it will have on a sensitive residential area. The development is simply too large for the site and too large in terms of impact on the community. The footprint is too extensive, the height too tall, and the massing of 20 double rooms of itinerant visitors with no investment in the community will only have a detrimental effect. Building on this inappropriate scale on a valuable inner-city greenfield site with a large variety of wildlife currently in habitation will ensure the loss of a valuable habitat that no amount of bird boxes and vertical planting can compensate. Were the applicant to reduce the scale of his ambition by 50%, lessening his profit but respecting the community and the environment, I'm sure the residents would be more receptive to this proposal.
Thank you. May I thank all members for the public for their comments. Can we move to the case officer, please? Could you kindly sum up in 5 minutes?
Thank you, Chair. I'll do my best. The case is Ben Royston, who's not
able to be here tonight, so I'm taking his place. I'm Paul Chick. Yes, as we've heard, it is a very tight site. It's a very steeply sloping site going from Colston Street on the left over here, down through to Rupert Street and Lewins Mead, with sort of really steep hillside on the side down here. Moving on to the proposals, it's for the partial demolition and partial demolition of 2 existing buildings, which are here and here. This one is for an HMO for 8 bedrooms. That's already got planning permission. That was from 3 years ago. And on the remainder of the site, there will be an apart hotel for 20 bed spaces. It was reduced from 22. The access is all from, vehicle access is all from Colston Yard at the top here, which is very tight. There is also pedestrian access from Johnny Ball Lane at the bottom, which will be made full use of in the proposals. The arrows here and the numbers will correspond to the next slide. So you can see there, as you go in through this arched tunnel access way through here, and if you turn left, that's the view you have, and you have the existing sort of employment units up the side there. If you get to the end of there and turn round, that's the view you have in slide 2. Slide 4 is further into the entranceway, and then slide 5 is looking across there down to the side at the back of the properties on Colston Street. This is where the views of the site will be, which is really from the bottom, from Rupert Street looking up, and there you see the existing developments on the hillside there. This is the elevation showing the back of the apart hotel looking from, the east elevation looking from Rupert Street. The approved scheme back in 2007 is shown in the red outline. And as you can see, the actual scheme proposed has come down quite a bit from as initially submitted, which is this dashed blue line here. So that it more or less correlates with what was approved back in 2007. Slight reduction in height here, comes out a bit further at this point, slight increase in height here, but broadly it's on the same parameters as that. And here are some visual images. We feel, well, I'll come on to the design in a minute, but yeah, you can see from that it will block out some of the views of Colston Street, certainly at this point here, from Lewins Mead. It's a tight site, as I've said before. It's going to cause a lot of difficulty with the construction period, which is envisaged to last for up to 2 years. It has caused a big reaction from the public. We've had 58 objections, 12 further objections following the revised plans, which reduced the scale of the building. Those included objections from the Conservation Advisory Panel, the Bristol Civic Society, and the Christmas Steps Arts Quarter. We also have an objection from our transport colleagues, TDM, who object to the increased use of the archway, the vehicular access through from Colston Street, because it's not wide enough for a pedestrian to get through there with a vehicle at the same time. While that's obviously the case, there is quite a long explanation in the report as to why it's felt that we're not going along with that objection. We still feel the application can be supported because there will be lift and stair access from Johnny Ball Lane to all of the apartments from the back, and it's felt a lot of people will go out that way rather than through the arch into Colston Street. Also, there are no current restrictions at all to cut the yard into Colston Street, so at any time the number of vehicles could increase depending on the occupancy and the activities taking place there. In terms of the design, initially we had concerns, but following the revisions we feel the scale is appropriate and it's looking suitable and sensitive for the site. As I said, the east elevation, this one I've got the slides up on now, is the key one, and we think it looks okay. Amenity is a problem. I think I'll go back on this one. If we look at the site as it is, this is where it's going to build out here. So this gap here, I think, is the, oh, sorry. This distance here is where I think some of the issues are. It is going to tighten that gap, obviously, but we feel there is still sufficient space to ensure there is no unacceptable loss of sunlight or daylight. And there won't be any overlooking, because on this side of the building there won't be any habitable windows. It will just be windows for circulation space and not from, to say, living space. This site was overgrown with quite a bit of vegetation. That was cleared sometime in the past. We don't know who did it. We had an ecological survey done there, and there is nothing there of any particular note in terms of any protected species. Yes, the construction period is going to be difficult. There will be using some parking spaces on the front here. There'll be a cement pipe coming through to the development site. We will be sorting out, if members are minded to grant this, we will need to sort out the construction management plan, but also a sort of environmental management plan to look more carefully and drill down into issues on, say, dust, noise, delivery times, and so on, to try and minimise any impact there might be. But obviously there will be impact. I think that probably sums it up. We think it's a good use of the site. It's a landlocked brownfield site. It's an imaginative use. It's for an apart hotel to provide temporary accommodation. There is a shortage of temporary accommodation alternatives for people to use in Bristol. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to be a bit naughty here and just cut through from questions, as we normally have, to the debate, pose an issue for members. I may yet be convinced or persuaded that this may be appropriate, but there's enough alarm bells for me ringing in terms of the appropriateness, the access, the impact on the conservation area, that personally I think it would be benefit from a site visit, as the ward councillor suggests. So I'm going to seek your pose your or ascertain whether you support that. Would you be happy to actually defer it to the next meeting, in which case we'll have a informal site visit just before then and actually make a decision after seeing the site? What do members think? Yeah. There seems to be unanimous support for that. So,
to say it would be a formal site visit, so if anyone wanted to vote, they'd have, because it's been deferred.
As Gareth's reminded me, because it's a deferral, it needs to be a formal site visit. So obviously only those members who can visit the site can actually vote and speak in the debate. But if you're happy, can I formally move deferral pending a site visit? Is there a seconder? Thank you, John. And I'll do a name vote. John? 4. Tom?
4.
Ed? Fee?
4.
Andrew?
I'm not sure if Andrew Fanny will thank me for this, but 4.
Farah?
4.
Oh, Philippa?
4.
Paul? And I'll vote 4, so unanimous for that. Deferral pending a site visit. Can I thank members for what's been, and the public for what's been a rather arduous meeting. Hopefully our next meeting in November will be a bit shorter, but we meet on the 16th of November. So can I thank you for your attendance and formally close the meeting? Thank you.